Hey guys, Dark Humility here. We have tested probably about 90% of the, I guess you could say, typical or common builds in Project Diablo 2 in the PD2 Season 2 closed beta. And today we're going to talk about the relative power rankings of the builds. I'm going to try to rank all the skills that I've mostly done a lot of testing. I've done a lot of
I
testing
can
mostly in the
already tell that I'll be your
mid
best
and late
friend in
game.
this forsaken
So I've
camp.
done most of the testing in like mid late game area, and we're gonna kind of talk about from rank D through S, how good the builds are. So D, C, um, B, A, and S. Now that being said, tomorrow there's gonna be more patch notes released, and there's gonna be more patch notes released as well in the future. So all of this stuff can change for what I'm about to say right now. All right, let's get started. So this here is a sorceress in the season 2 beta. I would say that FireWall and Inferno are excellent single target skills, but for mid game, late game farming, just in general, like maps, vanilla clear and whatnot, these skills are probably like a C tier, maybe a D tier. But Firewall's like amazing for like killing a boss. You could even probably kill Diablo clone with it. It's a great skill. Fireball is solid when combined with Combustion. This is the typical build you go for is Fireball Combustion. Combustion, Fireball in the mid late game overall, I would rank that a probably about a B because it's really good at clearing that vanilla content in that like early part of the mid game. But late game, I've tested it in maps quite thoroughly, and it definitely has fallen off a lot due to nerfs this season. And I wouldn't really recommend going this once you have like a fully geared sorceress any longer. But early game, it's you can just still plow through the stony tomb with combustion and fireball, no problem. Meteor is really strong this season. They definitely buffed it up quite a bit. They actually had to nerf it again after they buffed it because they buffed it maybe a little too much in the beginning. It was one-shotting in Dariel and whatnot, so now it's in a pretty good place, I would say. I would actually rank this an A tier skill. I wouldn't say it's quite an S, but it's definitely an A. It's not overpowered. It's strong. It's powerful. Some people might not like it because of the playstyle. It's a little janky, but its damage is definitely there. It destroys. It flattens mobs. It flattens mobs in maps. It flattens bosses. It's crazy. It's got like very low cooldown. It's an awesome skill. I totally recommend it for uses in mid and late game. At all points in the game, this skill is very strong. Also, enchant. Enchant is good in the late game. It's kind of just a fun thing you can do early game. But I would say, if you can get like dreams and you can get a dream on the sorceress at least, enchant fire, enchant cold, and whatnot. There's definitely some insane potential with the Widowmaker bow and some other skills. I would rank this an A tier build. You're definitely vulnerable. Definitely make sure to get that energy shield with that kind of stuff. You're vulnerable to dying for sure. Not a lot of defensive capability, but it's insanely strong. So playing with those enchants is always a good idea. I would say it's definitely A tier for sure. I'd also say Hydra is A tier as well. I also consider this a very strong build. It doesn't quite do as much damage as Meteor, so that's one thing to note here. But it's very safe. There's multiple Hydras. You're putting a lot of things that hit recovery at the same time, so the monsters can't reach you as easily as maybe with Meteor sometimes, where you gotta wait for it to come down. Even though it's a lot faster, it's still a bit of a wait here and there. Hydras are nice though. You can just teleport, lay down some Hydras, and kind of run around in circles, and the boss will usually just die. It's also an insanely effective build for Diablo clone as well, because you can kind of just run around the arena and just lay down some Hydras and dodge his attacks and pot when necessary. You can mostly just focus on surviving as the Hydras do most of the work for you. Just remember, lesser Hydra is used for a single target, as this is used for multiple targets, so this is better for mapping. This is better for killing Mephisto or Diablo clone. Another nice A tier build though. Very, very solid. The fire skill tree overall for the sorceress is looking very good this season. Definitely uses for almost all the abilities. Even Combustion, you know, that early mid game, you know, once you get to Hell, it could start farming some Stony Tomb and other things very effectively, one-shotting, even with lower damage. So, Fire Tree is a solid skill tree. Definitely a good thing. You might want to go this ladder in Season 2 for Project Diablo 2. Alright, guys. Next, let's go over the Cold skill tree. So, I already talked about Enchant. Cold Enchant paired with Fire Enchant is usually the way to go.
I can already tell that I'll be your best friend in this forsaken camp.
It definitely has a lot of power, and it also circumvents those immunities. It makes it to where the immunities don't matter very much. So that's really good stuff. Shiver armor is beastly. Shiver armor, 1 point for most builds. Solid stuff. I would say, Shiver armor is just something you should go. I'm not going to rank it because it's not a damage skill, but it's something usually you should at least put 1 point into most of the time for that extra defense boost, especially with a Defiance or Mercenary. Chilling armor honestly feels like it's in an odd place right now. It doesn't feel like there's many good uses except for maybe player versus player, maybe. Player versus player, I could see this being used against range attackers. You might be able to get some extra damage in. Let's say you go like Storm Shield and there's a boson or something. You can sit on top of them and maybe get some extra damage with Chilling armor. Besides that, I don't know really too many uses for that at the moment. All right, these are leveling skills. I wouldn't really say these are skills you would want to go for in the late game. Late game, these are like D tier skills right here. So make sure to just use those for leveling. Same thing with Glacial Spike, unless you're just trying to get some extra crowd control. But normally the crowd control is very effective with the other abilities I'm about to talk about. So these abilities in general are more like for leveling and maybe some extra damage, maybe when you're waiting for those Blizzard bolts to come down. Mostly Blizzard is probably the only place I really see these being effective in the late game, in the Blizzard build. But besides that, I would say just leave them alone for the early mid game. Alright, so Frost Nova. Frost Nova is probably the strongest build the Sorceress has in the late game, period. I would say this is an S tier build, 100%. It's on the high end of balanced, I would still say. I wouldn't say it's like overpowered or anything. You need good gear. You definitely need that block. You need like Storm Shield is really good, for instance, for this ability. You get some Energy Shield, max block, and then you can pretty much just jump into anything and start slamming it. It's really powerful. It does a ton of damage. In the early mid game, it's probably not going to be very good because you might not have the survivability to use it effectively, and you might die a lot. But I would say this is an S tier ability. Definitely something to go for when you want to min-max your gear in the late game. Blizzard, I would rank this I don't know. I would say maybe a B, C tier. It's gotten a lot better. Like it's gotten a lot better compared to a lot of other abilities. I mean, it's gotten a lot better to where it was in the past. So many buffs have been applied to this ability now. It's not like it was an LOD though. Like an LOD, this ability was the shit, right? It was awesome. But this is maybe, I don't know. Now it feels kind of like it's a weak version of Meteor, and you'd much rather just use Meteor. Like if you want to use an attack that like focuses on a hitbox, a small area of enemies, Blizzard is like an inferior version of Meteor, 100%. It's okay though. It's okay. I think maybe with a slightly expanded hitbox or maybe slightly more damage, I would be able to say it's maybe an A tier or at least a high B tier ability. But for now, unless there are any further changes, like I said in the beginning, it's probably not really the best thing to go for just yet. Ice Barrage. Ice Barrage is actually really strong this season. Last season it was definitely lacking a bit, but they increased the range on it, and they gave it a bit more damage as well. And Ice Barrage is actually pretty solid. I would say this is pretty solid, like high B tier, A tier ability. This is a strong ability. It's got a lot of range. You can use it to farm Travancore pretty safely. You can farm Mephisto. And you can even farm maps once it gets really powerful. So in that mid-late game, this ability is incredibly powerful. Also, you could even start out with it. You could start out with it, and it's probably one of the stronger starting abilities as well because of all the AoE potential and also the ability to also attack one target very effectively. And with all that pierce and all that range and all that power, that's definitely a build I would probably go for, especially if you want to try Ice Barrage and hasn't tried it before. I mean, it's not an LOD ability, so that's a good one. Frozen Orb. Frozen Orb, I like Frozen Orb a lot. This is a solid A tier ability right here. This is a solid A tier ability. I wouldn't say it's S tier like Frost Nova, but in the mid-late game, this ability does a ton of damage. And even like around 27 skills, very effectively destroys Mephisto, Travancore, things like that. This is a very strong ability. I think some people might be underestimating it at the moment. But based on a few buffs it got this season, it's definitely very strong. The AoE and maybe some of the effect and how you have to stand there and kind of just cast it over and over might not be as appealing as Frost Nova in the late game. And Frost Nova and teleporting smoother might be more appealing for destroying the monsters with that really high end gear. But it's still, like, I would say this is a solid A tier ability. I would say it's even slightly more effective than Ice Barrage if you can position correctly. Just have to, in order to get that damage out. But it's honestly, these abilities are close. And either one of these for like the mid game, mid-late game are super solid. And obviously for the late game, Frost Nova is the S tier one. So the cold skills in general are looking really good. The cold skills in general are looking extremely good. Just like the fire skills. I would say both of these trees are very, very worth teching into. Even Blizzard, which is the weakest skill in the cold tree, is not a bad ability anymore. So it's actually looking solid. You can definitely do what you want. Yeah, like when I think an ability is like bad, I'd rate it like D or low C. But this is almost there. It's almost there. It's getting there. It might need a little bit more love, but besides that, it's pretty solid. All right. So next is the lightning tree. Before I go into the lightning tree, I will just say that the teleport nerf can be a little frustrating for a sorceress, and one thing is sometimes you don't want to be teleporting constantly. In order to work around it, you might actually want to walk around and use your spells once you get closer to the monsters. I'd recommend maybe only using it to get from place to place, like point A to point B. Maybe not so much teleport use, like in LOD. However, for some skills like Frost Nova is still insanely strong, and you're mostly using teleport and Frost Nova constantly, so it just depends on the ability. Like Combustion with teleport is also insanely good. So, I mean, it's a nerf, but it's understandable. If you want to balance the skill a bit more, you kind of have to hit it a bit hard. It might be hit a little bit too hard, in my personal opinion, but in terms of the negative damage penalty. But you can level it up if you really want to reduce that penalty at least a little bit. So that's a pretty good thing. Also, one thing to note is that Energy Shield and Telekinesis are extremely good utility skills, especially in Hardcore. Even though they've been nerfed pretty heavily from LOD, they're still insanely strong. And just having them prevents you from dying early game, mid game, and late game. On a Nova build, Energy Shield is just so good, especially if you use it with max block. You just you just prevent so much damage. So if you're playing Hardcore, definitely look into these very good skills for sure. Now let's go into Charge Bolt. Charge Bolt, I would actually say maybe Charge Bolt. I wish I was joking about this, but I think Charge Bolt is actually the strongest ability on the Lightning Tree. The Lightning Tree is, I think, in the worst spot, and it's one of the worst, I'd say, trees, period, in the game at the moment. It's been nerfed pretty hard. It took a lot of hard nerfs, and, I mean, it's been rebuffed a little bit. This has been rebuffed quite a bit. Charge Bolt felt pretty good, but, I don't know. Once you get, really good gear, it seems good as well, but it's kind of tough. Early game, Charge Bolt's going to be good. Maybe ultra late game, it's going to be good as well. In combination with Static Field, I would say Charge Bolt is solid B tier ability, which is pretty much that's my middle ranking. I would say it's okay. It's not maybe quite balanced. I'd say maybe a little bit more power could be given to it, and it might still be okay, but it's almost there. And it's probably still like the best ability the Lightning Tree has, at least in the mid-late game. Nova is a very interesting one. Nova, I would say Nova right now is maybe low B, high C tier. It's like a weaker version of Frost Nova, but it doesn't freeze anything. And in order to get it even nearly or remotely as powerful as Frost Nova, you have to use Static Field in combination with it potentially, just to get that negative lightning res that's lacking on the Lightning Tree. You might notice that Fire Mastery and Cold Mastery, they all have Pierce. Lightning Mastery does not. So if you want to pierce those resistances, especially in maps where it can become very important, you're going to definitely want to combine it with Static Field. But to do that, you have to use like extra spells. And then even then, it doesn't do as much damage as Frost Nova, even if you have really high tier gear, which is interesting because it doesn't freeze as well. So it's like, I don't really see the point of going Nova currently this season when Frost Nova exists, but it's cool. And, you know, if you want to go Nova, it's pretty cool. I mean, you can definitely do it. And there's definitely maybe less lightning resistance in some maps, so that's definitely something you can think about, but I don't know. It definitely needs maybe some help, maybe from this ability. Thunderstorm doesn't really make much sense to do either. And one thing I've kind of thought of is that since Charge Bolt synergizes with Nova, one change that maybe could help both of these skills out is maybe making Charge Bolt a synergy for Thunderstorm and having them both be synergies for each other so that all four of these skills here make a build, and maybe this as well. And then you can get like a Thunderstorm Sorceress that has extra damage added to a Nova, so it's kind of like an Eye of a Storm effect with the bolts hitting all around her. That'd be kind of cool. But as it stands, you need way too many abilities to kind of like synergize and make these things kind of work. So it's really clunky at the moment. And Thunderstorm, I'd actually rate Thunderstorm by itself, I'd rate a D tier ability. Unless you're using it for PvP potentially, I wouldn't touch it for late and mid game farming when you have like mid game or late game tier gear. So it's definitely like I'd look into it for sure for PvP though. It's potentially a good thing. PvP, it's always a good ability because you can kind of just teleport around and it'll hit shit. So it'll just kill shit for you. So that's always kind of cool. You don't really have to worry about, you can just worry about dodging abilities and messing around with it and whatnot. All right. Lightning. Okay, Lightning is, even with really good gear, doesn't get nearly as high of damage as it gets in LOD. It gets maybe like less than 50% of the damage, and it still feels kind of bad. Especially since it doesn't make much sense to use Static Field in a lot of cases, like with Nova, because you don't jump directly into things. It really doesn't do enough damage. It needs maybe like a 20% damage buff, maybe more even, in order to feel pretty good again to actually use in most scenarios. The minimum damage, of course, of a lot of the lightning spells hurt it pretty bad. In this case, lightning is definitely hurt by that pretty bad. And the fact that it just doesn't do enough damage to justify its use. I would rate this a high D tier ability or a low C tier ability, which is sad because this is like one of my favorite builds from LOD. I hope it gets more love maybe later this season or maybe next patch notes, you never know. Or maybe next season, but yeah, it's not in a good place right now. I really wouldn't mess around with this too much. Frost Nova, yeah, I'll just go over it again. I mean, someone asked in the chat about Frost Nova. Frost Nova, I think, is the strongest mid-late ability in the game once you really get that gear going. Jumping around with Teleport and just destroying everything with Frost Nova is so effective. I would say this is an S tier ability, and it's a really nice ability. I definitely recommend playing that, or at least working towards it in the game. Alright, so Chain Lightning. Chain Lightning is the last skill I'm going to be going over here. Chain Lightning, I would say it's a C tier ability. It's slightly better than Lightning. It doesn't feel horrible to use because they buffed it up quite a bit. They actually did buff it up quite a bit, but it's... Oh man, it's just like a really weak version of Lightning Strike on a Javazon. That's kind of what it feels like. And it's it's not great. I mean, you get the
I can already tell that I'll be your best friend in this forsaken camp.
You get the teleport, you know, combined with this as well. It kind of nerfs it pretty heavily. You know, Javazons also have Valkyries to tank for them, so even though they have to go really close with it, they can also attack more rapidly with it, whereas the FCR for Chain Lightning is much slower. And you really only get about the same amount of damage with all that slowness and lack of tankiness. At least the on-sheet damage as Lightning Strike on a Javazon. So I don't really understand the point of using this yet until maybe it gets about a 15 to 20% buff. Almost like this. It's not quite as bad as using Lightning, but yeah, I don't know. These abilities definitely need a lot more help. I think the Lightning tree is definitely one of the saddest trees at the moment, and hopefully it'll get some CPR soon. Because right now it's not breathing. Alright. So, let's look at...
I can already tell that I'll be your best friend in this forsaken camp.
Let's look at the Amazon. So, we did the Sorceress. So we've done a lot of testing on her builds as well. Let's start in, you know, one of the most quintessential trees. Let's start
I can already tell that I'll be your best friend in this forsaken camp.
Lots of follows. Awesome stuff, guys. Alright, thank you guys for all the follows, by the way. Alright, let's go into some of these skills here. So let's actually start with the physical damage.
I can already tell that I'll be your best friend in this forsaken camp.
Look at all this physical damage. This physical damage is incredible. I am loving this right now. They finally buffed all this stuff up for Season 2, and this stuff feels crazy good with good gear. You get that good mid-late game gear, especially like really solid gear, and this stuff slams. You destroy Uber bosses with it. You destroy like maps with it. Like with Fend, you can like hit all the enemies that are right around you, so you can attack when you're totally surrounded. You can hit them all. You can life leech off of them with insane damage. The damage numbers are just really awesome and really high. Jab, you can hit everything in front of you. You can destroy Ubers with them. I destroyed Lilith with it not too long ago. Crazy good ability. And I really like the addition of Javelin and Spear Mastery to really make these abilities pop. I would actually say this build in the mid-late game is an A tier build. Definitely make sure you get that DR in hardcore though. I wouldn't say it's S tier. It doesn't clear at insane rates, but it clears fast. You might be surprised if you try to go for this, just how powerful this is and how effective it is for late game. Next, let's go over Power Strike. Power Strike, oh baby. Power Strike last season felt a little underwhelming, but honestly this season, it's looking good. They buffed the radius on it. I tested it. You can even go two-handed spear if you're feeling a bit risky, feeling a bit dangerous. You can go two-handed. But even if you go one-handed, it is powerful. And if you combine that with max Valkyrie, the Valkyries do an insane amount of damage as well. So it's a strong build. I would actually rate going pure Power Strike an A tier build. One thing to note is that the Javazon might have, like, I would say the most number of builds, or at least be one of the best, like, balanced or strong characters overall. There aren't many abilities on the Javazon that are not great, you know, that are not really like up to par where they should be. So most of these abilities are actually really good. So Power Strike is one of them. Charge Strike also feels like it's in a good place. I would say it's an A tier ability. Just make sure to really only use it against monsters.
I can already tell that I'll be your best friend in this forsaken.
Make sure to only use it against like monsters that have really high lightning resistance or bosses. So it's not really something you're going to be using all the time, but it's really strong. And if you use it against single targets and use it against targets with a lot of magic resistance, it's an insanely strong ability in the mid-late game. So if you want to focus on it, especially in combination with other builds such as Lightning Strike, it can be a very effective single target tool, whereas some of these other tools are better for AoE clear.
I can already tell that I'll be your best friend in this Forsaken camp.
Lightning Strike is amazing. It was amazing last season. Nothing was really too much changed on it, though. It's pretty much the same ability. It was still a good build. It was one of the Zaun's best abilities last season, and it's still an A-tier build. I would say it's an A-tier build. It's not like an insane, overpowered, overbuffed build, but it's a crazy build. It's a good build, and it destroys a lot of monsters. It's really good in maybe lower density, though. Super high density maps, this ability sometimes struggles because it has to hit all the targets individually, kind of like Chain Lightning does. But it's way more strong than Chain Lightning. You can get way more of these Lightning Strikes out in the same time you can get those Chain Lightnings out. And you can also have the tankage to back it up with the Valkyries. And it's just really good stuff in general. Plague Javelin and Poison Javelin. Poison Javelin, I played this a ton last season, in Season 1. The ability itself didn't get any changes this season. However, it did get a big buff to one of the primary weapons, which is Gargoyle's Bite, which is like the late game master weapon for this build. This ability I would rate as a B tier build. I actually thought it was really strong. Like in some maps, like River of Blood, for instance, this ability destroys. When there's no poison immunes, it cuts through everything. The monsters die very fast. You get enormous damage numbers on this ability. However, one thing I would note about this is that the hitbox, at least on Poison Javelin, is a bit small. The hitbox on Plague is very, very large. Plague has a cooldown, though. So you can maybe use this along with this. So like you can use this and then use these when it's off cooldown. But these feel a little bit clunky sometimes because there's so many monsters, and the hitbox on these thin javelins doesn't always hit all the monsters great. I wonder if maybe it's possible to make the hitbox a bit larger on it, maybe slightly. That might actually improve the ability a bit. But overall, I'd say it's a strong build, and it's a cool build. And there's a lot of cool items you can use for it, like the newly reworked and newly buffed Gargoyle's Bite. So I think it's a pretty neat build in the mid-late game, and I welcome anyone to try it. It's very, very cool stuff. Lightning Bolt, very good for those single targets on Lightning Fury. That's all I really have to say about it, though. Don't really want to give it a ranking because it's not really a mass clear build, but it does a ton of damage, so if you're fighting one monster and you didn't bother to get Charge Strike, this is probably the way to go. It's a strong ability in combination with Fury. Solid A-tier ability if I had to give it a rank, but yeah, it's not really that important to rank it because it's not really for mid-late game farming or mapping or anything, so it's pretty much how it works. Lightning Fury. Lightning Fury was a little bit weaker than Lightning Strike last season. Felt a little bit clunky because of the high mana costs, but they reduced the mana cost massively. And they tried to buff the bolts initially, and they made it ridiculous with 14 bolts. Like in those high density maps or those high density areas like the pit or something, it was just doing crazy damage when they buffed it up. I would have said it was like an S tier or even a double S tier build when it was buffed up with the bolts, but now I'm just gonna say it's a solid A tier build. It's a solid build, and in the mid late game it still does a lot of damage. The Ancestral Trial map is really nice for this ability, even without Infinity, because there's not too much lightning resistance, and you don't need Infinity. You don't need some of those other crazy faceted items or anything, and you can still do a ton of damage. So This ability rips through high density. This is maybe like 100 density or less, or 150 density or less. This is 150 density or more. So if you're doing those really high density maps, Lightning Fury is even better than Lightning Strike. And yeah, it's just crazy stuff. It's crazy good damage. It's still good damage, but it was good to see. It was good to see a try though on even more bolts. But that was pretty nutty. It's pretty nutty. I'm glad they reverted that a little bit because that would have gotten out of control real fast. All right. So then next we have, most of the passives in general, what I have to say is they're balanced and they're useful. In the Zaun skill tree in general, you just want to put 1 point in most of these passives, and it's really good stuff. However, depending on the build, though, you might want to max some of these out. Like Penetrate and Crypt Strike work really well with some of those bow builds or physical damage on, Fend and Jav, for instance. But overall, it's good stuff. You know, some maybe want to put more points into Pierce if you only have like a Pierce corruption item, and 1 point isn't enough to get 100% Pierce as well. So, you know, you just kind of have to figure out maybe, you know, your build. Do you actually need to Pierce through multiple monsters or whatnot? And you can put abilities in there. I actually think the rework to like these passives is pretty solid. They're all solid abilities. Decoy is also solid as well if you want to max it out and you want to play even safer. It could also potentially be very useful for something like Diablo clone, so just keep an eye on that ability as well. Valkyrie is insane. Like this is an S tier ability. It's not really a build. Like if you just go only into Valkyries, it's probably gonna be pretty underwhelming. But in terms of like how the Zon is currently structured, normally you're gonna want to max this ability out or at least get 2 of them. In most maps, though, if you max it out, the Valkyries will be really tanky, super tanky, and survive for very long periods of time. And in the case of Power Strike, if you max that out, they do a ton of damage too. So it's definitely an insane thing to have 3 Valkyries out on the field and all doing damage and all being effective and whatnot. So I like to max this out in most cases. So in the passive tree, this is usually the thing that you're looking to max usually. But not always, not always. Sometimes you might want to focus more on damage or AR and maybe the other synergies for your build, so it just depends, but it's definitely a super solid ability. Magic Arrow. Alright, now let's go into the bow skill tree for the Zon. Magic Arrow is a little underwhelming currently. It has received some buffs, but compared to all the other bow abilities, I would use this one last. I would say at best it's probably like a C tier build. It needs maybe about like 10 to 15% more damage, maybe even a little bit more range, maybe another arrow. I don't know. It doesn't have enough like range. It feels a little clunky. And since it does magic damage, there's no way to amplify it with things like Infinity. It might be even better in the mid game than the late game, to be fair, because in the late game, you know, there's more things that scale off of other abilities that aren't magic damage. But I don't know. I don't think there's anything too special with this ability, though, to be honest. Cold Arrow is mostly just used as a synergy at the moment, but you know it's pretty strong for leveling. Ice Arrow and Freezing Arrow. So Ice Arrow and Freezing Arrow. This might be, at least in the ultra late game, not the mid game, but in mid game I would say it's an A tier build. It does a ton of damage. It freezes everything, and it slaughters like density extremely well.
I can already tell that I'll be your best friend in this forsaken camp.
In the late game, I would say this is an S tier ability for sure. I would say this is like borderline overpowered with like 40 plus level scaling on this thing. Well, once this thing really gets going with Ice Bow, which is a pretty expensive rune word, and you know Infinity and everything else, it does such an absurd amount of damage.
I can already tell that I'll be your best friend in this forsaken.
If you guys are looking for a cool late game build to work towards, and this isn't nerfed at least in the ultra late game with that really high scaling at those high levels, it just does so much damage. In LOD, it already did a ton of damage when it got to like late game status, but they buffed it in this mod, and now it feels like in the late game this thing just shreds. Like Ice Arrow in combination with it is nice too. You can even do more damage in a short range with Ice Arrow, and in a long range you can just like freeze everything and just pop it. It's just crazy. You use it with like a Vigor Bow Mercenary, you run around and you just pop stuff. You can even use Fanaticism too, or you can use Infinity, but remember, most cold immunes cannot be broken by Infinity in this game, even in maps. So you might just want to go Fanaticism. Like if you get like a Faith Bow Mercenary with Vigor, and you get an Ice Bow on yourself, which is like a really late game kind of build, this thing will destroy. You can do any kind of map as long as there's not too many crazy cold immunes. It's great. It's a great ability. Multi-shot. Multi-shot is solid. I would rate this as an A tier ability if you're using normal bows, and believe it or not, I can't believe I'm saying this, but if you're using crossbows this season with the latest change to Soul Drainer and the negative 10 physical resistance possible on Soul Drainer, and the -10 physical resistance that is on every crossbow. Crossbows bring this up to an S tier build. Honestly, Barizza with runes in it, or just Barizza in general, is actually outperforming Windforce with multiple shot, which is pretty nutty. Barizza is crazy at this point. Like, in crafted crossbows are now a thing, and you can make crossbows hit so hard with that negative physical res. It's a little slower than attacking with a bow, but it's worth it. It shreds through all that physical resistance, and you do an absurd amount of damage to high density maps and other things. So I would say it's between an A or an S tier build depending on what bow you choose and your weapons and your setup. I tried multiple setups on it. I tried multiple bows. But you don't even need much gear with a crossbow, it seems, as long as you also have a soul drainer on top of it. But even if you get rid of the soul drainer, the crossbow just by itself is so good. So without all that negative physical res last season, crossbows, even though they were doing a lot more damage, were still feeling pretty clunky. But now that they do so much more damage, they're not really that much slower than bows, and they have all that physical pierce. It's looking good. It's looking good. Guided Arrow is still a solid ability. I would say it's an A tier ability in general. It's still maybe better against like physical single targets though. It's definitely not like an ultimate clear ability, but you could clear with it as well. I mean, you definitely could. It's a solid ability though. Use it as you must also to circumvent physical res as well, and to use it against single targets. Solid stuff. Strafe is really cool. If you use like proc items like Atmos and whatnot, you can get amplified damage on all the monsters, and you can do a lot more damage. I would just say it's A tier though. It's never going to get as good as a multi-shot crossbow, but it's good stuff though. It's good stuff. It's definitely an A tier approach to using a physical damage boa. I've also made physical damage boas on LOD, and honestly in this mod they feel so good because of the corruptions, the puzzle boxes, the physical pierce negative on crossbows. They're so strong. It's so strong. I would even say crossbows are borderline overpowered with the addition of the negative physical res on the soul drainers, but hey, enjoy it while it lasts, because crossbows are king. Let's get it. Alright guys, that will be it for the Javs on today. There's no more skills. She doesn't have any more. We ran out. Which is how it is. Alright. Let's talk about the Barbarian. Barbarian, solid stuff, We could always go over the masteries, but I love the reworks to all the masteries, most of them which were done for Season 1. I love how there's more like incentive to actually max out the masteries. Not only are they different synergies for some of the other actual combat skills and war cries, but they actually provide a lot of useful statistics. Like Iron Skin isn't just a defense bonus anymore, it gives you PDR. And PDR is like one of the most important things for surviving in the game, period. Especially when you don't have a shield and you don't have block, like that's what you rely on 110%. So Barbarians in general are just really, really solid. Really, really solid. And they have so many good abilities to synergize with their combat skills, and they're in so much a better place than they were in LOD for mid and late game and otherwise farming. But alright. Besides the masteries, though, which I can talk about more in depth, I mean, it's pretty straightforward. I love the reworks to the mastery tree, and it's all AS tier stuff. It's just good stuff in general. I would say that Iron Skin is usually something that it's a nice filler skill to max out, maybe compared to some of these other ones, simply because it gives damage reduction, and it's so good. It's so good. All right, let's talk about some of these physical abilities here. Physical abilities, Frenzy. I played a lot of Frenzy last season. I also tried it this season. Compared to most other damage attacks on most other characters, and compared to the other skills on the Barbarian, I would say it's definitely a B tier ability. It's definitely not one of those solid, like, A tier, solid, balanced abilities. It feels like maybe it's lacking a lot of damage in maps, and there's actually, like, believe it or not, a Wolf Barbarian, which is not a Frenzy Barbarian. It's not even really a Barbarian, but using the skill Wolf Howl, you turn into a wolf, a Druid wolf, And combined with these masteries, a Wolf Barbarian is insanely strong. I'll go over the Druid later, but it's actually stronger than the Druid Wolf in most ways, if not always. And the Frenzy doesn't really match up to Fury on a Wolf Barb, unfortunately. And Wolf Barbs are more tanky, and they could do a lot more damage. They run around just as fast as Frenzy, but Frenzy just doesn't quite hit that kind of level in the mid late game. If you want to use it for killing Uber bosses, which is what I mostly used it for last season, like key bosses, Ubers, farming torches and whatnot, it's still very strong because against single targets, you hit both of those. You just hit them constantly, just swinging away, swinging away, destroying them. But otherwise, it's a decent ability. It's definitely not in a bad place. It's just that I think it's outclassed by a lot of other abilities at the moment. Bash. Bashing is better than ever. The only thing that's annoying about it is that it has a chance to knock back enemies. So I honestly think maybe you just want to use this against single targets, maybe. Knocking things back is annoying when you're a physical damage dealer because you have to, if you knock them back, you have to run back up to them to hit them again. And then if you knock them back again, it's the same story. So it's kind of cool. I'd rate this a B tier ability as well, but it's in a much better place than it was, and it makes more sense to actually use in more situations. Double Swing is just part of Frenzy. If you don't know how Frenzy works mechanically, if you charge up your Frenzy stacks and then you use Double Swing, you're actually going to be swinging your weapons faster. You can hit higher attack speed frames with Double Swing. So it's basically just part of Frenzy. And it's Frenzy's better cousin when it comes to once you're fully stacked up, you slam so much harder with Double Swing. So make sure to use that in combination with that ability. Let's go to Leap Attack next. Leap Attack, I tried it out, and man, it feels so good, especially like with high damage gear. And it does a lot of damage, like it hits really hard. It got nerfed though last season after it was maybe doing too much. And I don't know, it feels like maybe the radius or like the AoE is maybe a little small in this ability. Like, I was using it a whole bunch, I was just leaping around, and it honestly felt like it was hard to hit monsters sometimes with it. You had to get, like, right on top of them almost. And if you're in a map with high density, like, you have to be, like, right on top of that little small group of monsters just to hit them directly. It felt like it had enough damage. It felt like maybe the AoE radius. It kind of feels like Poison Javelin in a lot of ways. Like, Poison Javelin also has, like, a billion damage. But it's hard to actually apply that damage, and you have to throw like billions of javelins sometimes. Just like you have to leap like billions of times in order to actually kill the monsters. So it seems like maybe it's like a area of effect problem more so, and I would rate this ability a B tier ability though still, because it does so much damage, and it's really fun to use. Just like Poison Javelin, I feel like it's at that level, it's decent. It's not like at that great level, but you can definitely go with it. Maybe it'll get some more love in the future, kind of like Poison Javelin, and maybe it'll be kind of up there with some of these other abilities. Concentrate. Concentrate, I mean, it's a good single target ability, but if I'm being totally honest, I don't know why you would use Concentrate over Berserk, even against single targets. And obviously, if you're trying to like map with something like this, it is really clunky. Like there's not enough range on it. It doesn't hit enough monsters. And ultimately, it doesn't feel very good to actually use this. You can make it very powerful, and you'll still only be hitting a very small group of monsters, or just one monster, and it doesn't do too much. It's nice for a defensive bonus. The defensive bonus almost makes you think it should be a nice ability for like running up to things and just slashing them, but it just doesn't have the radius. It doesn't have it needs more of a cleave or something in order for it to actually be effective. I almost feel like it needs like more splash, more cleave, something. It's a little too clunky. I actually rate Concentrate a D tier ability at the moment. Not very good. I wouldn't really mess around with this too much, except as a 1-pointer. As a 1-point wonder, it's Yeah, it might be good for PvP as well, right? Because it's a single target and does so much damage, and it's good for the defensive capability. Which actually someone in the chat just reminded me of. So this is one of those PvP potential abilities for sure. Uh, but yeah, it in PVM it underperforms greatly, and mostly what I use it as is as a one pointer. It's not a build; it's just a one pointer that you can do some magic damage against highly physical resistant monsters. But most of the time you don't need it, and it's because of this ability right here, and I'll explain that a bit later. So I definitely think for like farming, it's definitely D tier for sure. Berserk. Berserk I would rate like a low C tier, D tier ability. It feels a lot better to use than this ability, simply because it reduces physical resistance. It has so much physical pierce, and it doesn't matter how much physical res something has, it cuts right through it. And if you use Berserk in combination with Battlecry, there is no physical resistance you cannot break with this ability, which makes it really good against certain monsters, certain very physical resistant monsters and single targets. However, for PvP, this might even be like insanely good. Like it might even be like a tier A, tier S against Diablo clone or Ubers. It might also be like A tier or S tier. But for like in general, clearing the game in mid and late game, it's probably at best a C tier. But it's maybe it's a specialized ability, right? Maybe it's specialized for killing Ubers and things like that. But for that, it's good. It's good. If you want to kill Ubers, you want to kill really powerful monsters, Berserk is solid. Whirlwind. 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 So they buffed this ability a lot. And in the beginning of testing beta, this ability was, I would say, a double S tier ability. It was so strong. You could just literally hold down the shift button, hold down the right click, and just Beyblade through a tier 3 map, which actually has a lot of physical resistance, by the way. And you would just cut through everything. Even with just a Breath of the Dying, we're not talking about like a Ethereal Grandfather or something. We're talking like a decent runeward weapon, like some kind of runeward that has some, pretty high tier runes, but you would just like everything got cut through like butter instantly, would die when you pass through it. It was crazy. but but Whirlwind I would now say is an A tier ability. It is a strong ability and it's well balanced. I feel like the nerf they made to it is justified. I tried it after the nerf, and it's still super strong. Even with full IK, you can tear through vanilla content. You can tear through chaos. You can even destroy maps to a degree. Maybe not as fast as higher tier gear, but it's solid and it's safe and it's powerful. This is a good ability. Definitely fun to use. Way more fun to use than last season, where it felt really clunky and really useless. So for season 2, this is an A-OK. Let's go get it. Double throw. So what can I say about double throw except that it's the strongest ability on the barbarian at the moment. It was also the strongest ability on the barbarian in season 1. This is an S tier ability in my estimation. It might be overtuned. Matter of fact, because they fixed the bouncing this time in season 2, they fixed the bouncing. I think it's definitely overtuned for sure. I played with some basic stuff, like we're talking like basic throws, no crazy corruptions, just some random wraith flights. I mean, I know wraith flights aren't the easiest things sometimes to find, but they're not super hard to find either. You can also get some crafted throwing weapons. I tested maybe some other throwing weapons as well, and it shreds maps. The maps just get absolutely obliterated. The more linear the map is, the better too, because you throw and it just bounces off of everything and they melt. It melts everything. This ability is crazy. If you want to have a lot of fun with the barbarian, you want to be super tanky, super safe, and do super huge amounts of damage, double throw is for you. This is a wow. What an ability. As a matter of fact, you don't even need F lacerators. Like, you can shred everything even without amplify damage. I tested that too. It's crazy. It's a crazy strong one. I definitely think it's overtuned for sure. But, for now, unless it's nerfed, S tier, absolutely. Make sure to go use that one. All right, Warcry. So well, I guess one thing I should note is that these are nice utilities, and putting 1 point into them, especially if you have a lot of plus skills, getting those extra items can make all the difference for magic finding, especially in Travancore. So make sure to get those, especially if you're trying to hork, quote unquote, those nice juicy monsters that drop really good items like elites and monsters in Travancore. All right, Warcry. Warcry is really strong. Warcry is a very strong ability. In vanilla, you guys might remember that it had a really nice stun, which no longer exists, but it didn't do all that much damage. It was damage-wise, it was pretty underwhelming unless you had a lot of negative physical res from like Reaper's Toll or something, and it definitely took a lot of hits, and it was really good in PvP because of the stun. You could like slow kill someone, and all they could do was helplessly watch as they died or exited the game. But it's no longer that ability. It's got a way bigger range. It does a ton of damage. I would say it's an A tier ability. It's not overpowered though. It definitely hits a certain range of the area, or should I say, it only hits a certain area, and it doesn't kill everything instantly, normally, even with really good gear, but honestly, the gear is very cheap. It's not super expensive. It's very strong. It has a great mid to late game progression, and the more plus skills you get, the better it feels, the more damage it does, and it does a ton of damage once you get a lot of skills, so it's great. Just make sure to max out that Battle Cry, of course. If you use Battle Cry in combination with this, because it's physical damage, you can destroy anything. I mean, the physical resistance gets pierced. It's crazy. I actually, on that note, Battlecry is not a build. It's like something you should get on like almost every barbarian. At least 1 point, if not max. Because this ability is an S tier ability for the barb. That ability to break so much physical resistance, or even break physical immunities with this. I mean, I talked about it in combination with Berserk, but Berserk can't, Berserk can only do so much there. This just like this shreds everything. Like you want this applied to if you see a Uber boss that has a lot of physical res, or just anything in general that has a lot of physical res, like some of those flesh spawners in River of Blood. That thing is crazy. That's such a good ability, and I definitely recommend focusing this very hard on most builds. Even if you don't have to use it all the time, just being able to use it to crush those stone skin monsters is so good. And of course, it's a synergy for Warcry, so it's almost a no-brainer that an AoE ability combined with another AoE ability is just going to make your damage crazy sometimes. Gremward has been buffed a lot. I like this new change, though, because now it does a ton of damage. I don't recommend using this in solo play very often because it's inconsistent. It takes a lot of extra time to spawn it, and normally you can kill things faster than using it. But in a party, this damage buff is very nice, very nice. Make sure to at least put 1 point into it for parties. It's a solid E tier ability, if not S tier in parties. It's great. Okay, Shout. This part of the tree here, this is all like utility. On hardcore, I like maxing battle orders on hardcore. If not, you can focus maxing Iron Skin, either or both on hardcore, to get that life and that DR up, because there's not too many ways to buff up your life in PD2 as high as like in vanilla, because you don't have that crazy percentage max life. So you got to kind of take what you can get. Some of those maps hit so hard, and 200 life can make all the difference. 300 life can make all the difference. I definitely like maxing this out. They recently changed in Season 2 Battle Command to have more damage compared to Season 1. So this is another good option. Let's say you just want more damage, and let's say you're playing maybe a double throw build. Double throw, you don't usually want to get super close to the monsters, so maybe you don't even want Battle Cry because it doesn't make sense. You don't really get in that range to activate this effect. So maybe you just want to max out Battle Command. Like Battle Command is a solid max on some builds, especially the ranged ones like Double Throw, 100%. And Shout is just Shout's still kind of 1 point. unless you're in a party, Shout's not going to be super effective. You'd much rather have Iron Skin because not only do you get more defense, but you also get DR with it as well. So you're usually going to want to put 1 point into this unless you're in a party, and you might consider maxing it out if you just want to give everyone a ton of defense. And of course, this is a nice 1 point wonder for some builds. Obviously, it's a synergy for others, but make sure to put 1 point into Howl, especially on hardcore, just in case you run into some nasty monsters. You feel like you might die if you just engage them directly. Just make sure to pop that Howl. All right, Barbarian looking good. Double throw, strongest build on him. All right, so let's go into the Necromancer. I don't know why I did that. Okay. All right, Necromancer. This is one of my favorite characters, by the way, besides the Sorceress. I just love him thematically. He's just such a cool dude. All right, so let's talk about Dark Pact. Let's go for the Curse tree first. Dark Pact was very underwhelming as a damage skill in season 1. As a matter of fact, in season 1, you wouldn't go Dark Pact. You would just go Curses if you're in a party, and you would ignore this because it just didn't do enough damage, period. Now, this is an A-tier skill. This is an A-tier skill. This has actually been buffed a ton. If you check the patch notes for Season 2, you will see that these synergies have been boosted to the sky. And it finally feels good. Like now, you only really need to get 2 skills with a lot of plus skills. So I'm talking like endgame here. If you already have like 45, 46 skills on this thing, and you have all the synergies, you can pop huge packs of enemies in maps in like 2 curses. So you can solo farm this pretty easy. You don't need super large amounts of rotations necessarily. That being said, though, a Dark Force spawn, you can get up to 4 rotations, and you can make it do a ton of damage in groups as well. Honestly, it kind of needs to do that damage as a trade-off for consuming the curses because you have to reapply them. Definitely make sure there's an insight somewhere on your team or on yourself to use this because the mana cost can get pretty crazy. Just got to make sure you got that high mana regen or at least mana per kill stat. That's another very good one for this. But if you have those stats, this thing, it hits hard now. It hits really hard. It does magic damage, of course, as well. But yeah, it's strong, especially in high density because of the small AoE like burst bomb effect. So yeah, you can be a bomber necro for sure. Put a stat on there. But anyway, yeah, it's good to go. As for the curses, I like the reworks on most of the curses, or all the curses. I feel like they're all strong curses in different situations. For breaking those immunities and lowering the resistances even further, obviously this is useful in parties. Decrepify, I just love this rework. This is like one of my favorite like tree reworks in the game. The curse skill tree, it's so good. And all the curses feel good, and there's actually a reason to put points into the curses now. Not just for... No! Oh, thank you so much. Big CKO. Joining Xana's attack squad, the Ghost in the Machine, the Arcane Disciples. Let's get it, chat. Thank you so much for the hype, man. Dark Pact, not just for Dark Pact, by the way. Not just for Dark Pact, but after all my testing, putting more than 1 point into the curses, unlike LOD.
I can already tell that I'll be your best friend.
The idea of having Curse Mastery to increase the number of curses applied, it's just so cool. It's such a good concept, and it really makes going a Curse Necro feel like a thing. It also makes it feel more like a thing to amplify, builds that are otherwise pretty passive, like summoner builds, because you can then cast curses as well to amplify physical damage or magic damage. So it's just really good stuff. This tree is like one of the coolest reworks, and in Season 2 with Dark Pact finally being up to speed, it feels like a good tree. Definitely an A tier though, not an S tier. It's not crazy strong, and keep in mind that it does require some APM to cast those curses and blow them up. Sometimes you gotta cast multiple curses, and then you have to use Dark Pact multiple times to blow up different areas of the screen where the curses have been applied. And it's cool. It's cool. It's definitely not for the people that are worried about carpal tunnel, though. I will say that. But it's strong. It's very strong. All right. Here we go. Here we go. Poison and bone skills. All right. Poison and bone skills. Let's start with poison. Poison arguably is A to S tier, kind of depending on where you're at in the game and just how good of gear you have. And of course, your use of Blood Warp. This can be one of the most mobile, high damage builds in the game, especially when it comes to destroying vanilla content like the Pit, in combination with a 0 cooldown Blood Warp. It is deadly. It does crazy damage, especially with Death's Web. If you get Death's Web, this build is crazy. The negative res on it, even with 3-piece trains, it does a ton of damage. It's definitely a risk-reward build, though, kind of like any Nova, just like Frost Nova. Can be dangerous. The Necro, in many ways, is actually squishier than the Sorceress. And I know that sounds strange, but hear me out. Blood Warp drains your health. I know it gives it back to you now with regen, which is really cool, which makes it an even better ability now. But if you constantly teleport with it, you're going to drain your life fast. And on top of that, you don't have Energy Shield. And Energy Shield blocks all forms of damage, whereas Bone Armor only blocks physical damage. So it's a pretty squishy build. It does a lot of damage for a reason. Some people think it's broken, but I mean, you definitely need crazy good items for it. Like Death's Web is like one of the rarest items in the game, among like a couple of other insanely rare items. So yeah, it's definitely expensive if you want it to be broken powerful, which is why it's borderline S tier. But honestly, I think it's in a pretty good place based on the risk you have to take with this. Maybe in softcore it's even more broken because dying is okay. So, but it's pretty good. It's pretty good. It's pretty good. I definitely recommend this build to anyone that wants to just obliterate tons of monsters and just have a lot of fun with it in general. I definitely enjoyed trying out this build in the beta. Very good stuff. Even Desecrate, by the way, hits enemies very hard. It does a ton of damage. Poison Daggers may be just better for early game. I mean, the area of effect is still pretty small, so I don't know if you should go too hard into the Poison Dagger in general. As a late game build, this would definitely be like a C tier build. And if you were just using this ability, it'd probably be like A tier or B tier. And this would be like, this would definitely be like S tier, A tier. So this is good stuff. Huge area of effect, huge damage, huge fun, powerful. Bone. Bone is crazy. Bone is crazy. But yeah, one thing I should also note about Poison Nova is if you don't get a lot of sorry before I go into Bone. You need a lot of Pierce though. You definitely need Pierce, and there's a lot of maps with Poison Res. So like River of Blood, for instance, is really good with this. So you kind of have to pick your battles, and it's risky and it's very powerful with the right gear. But maybe in the mid game, it's not the most amazing thing in the world. It's definitely maybe more for like the late mid game or like late game. So that's another thing I should mention about that. All right, Bone. Let's go. Bone is great. I say the whole Bone tree, I give it a thumbs up. This is an A tier build. It's not an S tier build. Doesn't do a billion damage, even with really good gear. But it does a lot. It clears maps fast. Teeth. In narrower maps, like narrower hallways, Bone Spear almost seems more effective than Teeth, and Bone Spear does a ton. And then Teeth has been buffed. Teeth does even more damage. They've all been buffed, I think, by the way, this season. But Teeth does a lot of damage now. Teeth is no joke. It's got a huge area of effect. In really open maps, this ability shines a lot, like Phlegethon or Ruins of Ijun. And maybe this one would is better for like Throne of Insanity, for instance. So it just kind of depends on, and it also depends on the room sometimes too. So you can just use these abilities interchangeably. The Bone Tree is looking solid though. I give it an A tier, very good. And these are all just nice utility abilities. 1 point Bone Armor usually can get you like 200, 300 free Absorb, that can save your life on hardcore. So even if you're not trying to sacrifice all your damage, it's very solid as well. Now let's go over Corpse Explosion. So I almost forgot Corpse Explosion, believe it or not. I almost skipped over it. Corpse Explosion. Corpse Explosion it was really strong last season. So last season, this was like one of the strongest builds. I would have said it was like A S tier last season. This season, it lost. So the thing about Corpse Explosion is that it does a lot of fire damage, and fire damage was boosted a ton by full Tring set with 6 to Fire Mastery. Now that set only gets 3 to Fire Mastery, and it might be nerfed even more. And on top of that, it lost some of its power with the revives as well. And it definitely required like Infinity and things like that to really get going anyway. So now I almost feel like Corpse Explosion it's, I don't know, maybe a C, even a B tier, maybe even a C tier build now. It's not feeling very good. I tried it with multiple setups. I tried it even with Trings, of course, and it feels a lot weaker than it felt last season. You definitely need to Corpse Explode way more times to get that same effect. Very unlike Death Sentry, by the way, which we're going to go over, which also has Corpse Explosion, but Death Sentry feels way better than this, so... It's probably because it doesn't do enough percentage of corpse life or something, and it doesn't get high enough damage. But it's looking a little bit weak this season. I don't know if this is really the build to go for anymore, unless it's changed. All right, so let's go into the summoning skills. So let's start with skeletons. So the skeleton tree, which is right here, it's pretty much the skeleton tree. Skeletons are feeling stronger than ever. They buff them. They're feeling good now. Before, it felt like they were great tanks, but mapping with them was pretty slow. Killing things with them, even with a lot of gear, with even a ton of skills, was slow. Now you don't even need that many skills. Even in the mid-game, once you get to around 30 skills, they're actually capable of mapping. They do die, though, from the maps in a lot of cases, but they are capable of doing it. They definitely hit pretty hard. It's a nice laid-back build that does a lot of damage, and it's very safe. I rate this an A-tier build now because it doesn't do a bazillion damage, but as a build, it's a solid build. It's a very good build. Skeletons is solid this season. I highly recommend trying those skeletons if you love summoning. Summoning is always a fun build, always a nice laid-back build, and combined with high amplify, you can tear through even most physical resistances. So you got a really nice build here going with skeletons. Also, remember with skeletons, you can also combine it with clay golems by maxing out golem mastery and putting any remaining points into clay golem to boost its damage even more. So technically, you can even get like 13 physical damage dealers here from this setup right here, and it does a ton of damage. So you get more tankage, more damage. Golems and skeletons very synergize very well with each other, so definitely like to recommend that one. Revives were definitely S tier last season, especially if you revive those Bloodlords, Deathlords. You know what I'm talking about, the Frenzy Beasts that just tore through everything. You got enough damage auras on those things, and you almost didn't even need Corpse Explosion. This build synergizes with Corpse Explosion, of course, because it's a synergy. And Corpse Explosion Revive is definitely like A S tier last season because of this. The revives, though, have taken enormous hits to the damage. Initially, they actually nerfed them so hard that they did like no damage at all. They rebuff them, but they still do so little damage, even with really good revives. So they're mostly useful as a tank element. But when you're already going summons, you don't need extra tanks, you need extra damage dealers. So Revive is honestly feeling like it's definitely a C right now. I would say it's not a D tier, but it's still useful on Corpse Explosion at the least. But I give it the same rating as I give Corpse Explosion because this build's not looking very great right now. So even early game as well, like mid game, the revives are very underwhelming, and even late game, they're very underwhelming. So this might not be what you want to do this season either. Like last season, Corpse Explosion and Revive were popping off. This season, not so much, unless something changes tomorrow when we get the final patch notes. Right now, it's not very good. Okay. Let's go over golems. So clay golems, you can go pure clay golem, and these things are beastly. They are very strong. I would rate it probably though a B to A tier build though, because it almost seems like focusing on the skeletons and then getting 5 clay golems is the way to go. Whereas instead of maybe just focusing on the clay golems. That being said though, their single target is crazier, way crazier than this is, and they have crazy good effects. So just going pure clay golem is still super solid this season. I give it a go for sure. The number of points you want to put into Blood Warp. By the way, the ability to have a Necromancer teleport is amazing. Definitely is going to cost your life though, so be careful how many times you use it in succession. If you get that cooldown to 0, which you can actually do on this ability, you're going to be draining life like crazy, so you're going to have to be chugging Jews or something, but it's very strong, it's very good. I love it for repositioning summons as well, right on top of a boss. Make sure to at least have 1 point into that, but otherwise you can even max it for certain builds. Very cool stuff. Blood Golems, they also feel kind of underwhelming. I feel like their main purpose is to give you life, but they just don't give you enough, and they don't give it to you often enough. Maxing out Blood Golems kind of feels like a waste in almost every case I can possibly think of. I'm sure maybe someone can think of a case where it's actually pretty good, but I'd actually say maxing these out, probably not worth it. I would say probably a D tier approach to the summon tree for sure. Iron Golems are only D tier because they're so buggy. They need help. They definitely need improvement. Maybe in Season 3 we'll see it. I think it's going to take a lot of work because they disappear sometimes, so when you make them out of a nice item, it's not worth it because they'll just like disappear off the screen. Maps are huge, so it's easy to run away from them, and it's easy for them to get, lost and destroyed. The other thing about them is that even though you can put some crazy good weapons on them and whatnot, I actually tried F Cranium Bashers on these for fun. I just put like 6 ohmed F Cranium Bashers on them, and even with all that, their damage was kind of underwhelming. So I don't know. It's not worth using these. Like, if you just want to use golems, you can use the disposable ones that get even more life and they get slow. I'm not too sold about this. The other thing about iron golems is that if you have more than one of them and you try to put auras on them currently, they'll disappear if you enter and exit games. So you'll only be able to keep 1 iron golem. So let's say you put a pride, a beast, I don't know, infinity. You just go ham on those crazy things, and then you enter another game, they'll actually disappear, and you'll just lose your god tier reward. So yeah, it's a trap. It's a trap. It's not good right now. It's not in a good place. It definitely needs more help in order to be something that you actually want to tech into. D tier build as well. Fire golems. I would say this is I don't know, somewhere between a C and a B tier build. It's been buffed a lot in order to make it good this season. There's definitely an intention to make this build really solid, and it's definitely there from the developers. I still don't think it's in a great place, though. It does a ton of damage. It almost feels like the damage is good now. Like, the damage is in a good place. They do a ton of damage. However, the main problem with this is that their aura radius is so tiny. You almost have to constantly respawn these things just to get them to like hit the monsters, to actually attack the monsters, or to apply damage to them. The aura does a lot of damage, and so does the on hit. I mean, you could maybe make the aura a little stronger, but I think what they really suffer from is I've actually like showed my chat this. But like if you spawn it on an area, it'll only hit like the skeletons that are like right around it. And anything else that isn't like right next to it doesn't take any damage at all. So it's kind of got that problem that like concentration and berserk have for the barbarian. It just doesn't hit anything. It's definitely got a hitbox issue for sure, at least for the AOE. So it's wrecked a little bit. It's definitely wrecked a bit. So yeah, let's see. Did we go over all the revives? Did we go over all the skeletons? Yes, I mean, went over everything as all the major builds for the Necromancer. I really hope the Fire Golems do get buffed more. I should say that about that as well, though. I really do hope they get buffed more. Overall, though, The Necromancer has some bad skills, but it definitely has a lot of solid trees, and there's more solid, viable skills than ever in almost every tree, because Season 2 is going to be awesome. And they've definitely applied a lot of balance work to Season 2. However, next up we have the Druid. Oh, you know what? Killa was right. I forgot something. That's alright. You know, I do it a lot. He's right. I forgot something. Let's go back to the Amazon real quick. Just to go over something else. Okay, so I did forget the fire skill tree. I forgot the fire skills actually completely. Yeah, Chain Lightning and Lightning got buffed a lot, Cold Bleeded, but they didn't get buffed enough. They were so weak last season, it was almost comical, and they're still very weak. Anyway, let's go into Fire Arrows. I forgot to mention the Fire Arrows. I don't know why. I actually did try them out too. I played the builds. I even played with the endgame version with the Phoenix Bow and the Hand of Justice. And Fire Arrow seems good. I would say this is another A-tier build on the Amazon. So remember how the Amazon had so many A and S tier builds. Well, it's just another good build. I mean, it kills a lot of stuff. It's very powerful. It pierces. The fire arrows destroy things close up. I would say, though, with Immolation Arrow, it feels a little clunky to use because of the cooldown. You can use this in between the explosion arrows, but it almost doesn't ever feel worth it. I really like to see something that makes the skill feel worth it. Immolation Arrow is definitely like a C tier thing, but the rest of these are definitely A tier for sure. Okay. Anyway. Yeah, that was the fire arrows for the zone. Sorry, we didn't go over that when I was going over the zone. But yeah, no, it's solid. Like mid-late game, even early game for leveling, like cold arrows and fire arrows, very solid. Okay. Let's go over the Druid. All right, we're back to the Druid. Yeah. All right. So, here's what we're going to do here. We are going to talk about the Summon Druid. Summon Druid has a lot of cool abilities and has a lot of cool aminals, as I call them, aminals. And the aminals are very strong. Just like with the Summon Necro, I feel like they're in a great place. They do a ton of damage late game, almost effortlessly. You don't even need tons of skills. Yeah, they're very good for all the way from early to late game progression. That being said, if you're playing Summon Druid, the way I would recommend doing it is when you start out in the beginning of the game, you just only put all your points into Ravens. And honestly, Ravens will destroy all of normal mode for you. That's all you gotta do. Just gotta put all your points into Ravens, and normal dies. Ravens are crazy strong. I would say this is like at least for early game, it's an S tier ability.
I can already tell that I'll be your best friend in this forsaken
Early
camp.
game, it's an S tier ability, but overall, everything ends up being an A tier ability in the mid-late game. I wouldn't say it's an S tier approach because no matter how many skills you get, they'll never do as much damage as some things. It's just like Summon Necro, right? Like summoners, you don't expect them to do the craziest damage. They're safe, they can be fun. They don't require a ton of game knowledge either. It's really good, especially for newer players to play summoners in general, or even players that are just looking to get into hardcore because it's very safe. You can use them as meat shields. You have so many meat shields. You have so much damage from them. Having multiple bears is also crazy. It's a solid tree. It's definitely still A tier. They didn't change it very much this season, if at all. I don't think they changed it at all, actually. But it was still a solid build last season. It's still a solid build this season. Oak Sages are really strong, depending on the build. Heart of the Wolverine can be good. More so with physical damage on softcore, and usually you're going to want more like life and regen on hardcore. They buff the regen a lot this season on Oak Sage, so one thing to keep in mind is that if you're in a team, it might help a lot to have a really powerful Oak Sage because your whole team will be like refilling their life bars really fast, or their life orbs, I should say. health orbs. Anyway, yeah, they're going to be refilling it really fast because the regen looks really, really good. So if you're playing on a team, and remember that you can also even synergize the health regen with other skills as well. So support Oak Sage Druid is really a thing with like Oak Sage and Creepers. And you can get all that life and mana and you're set to go. As a support build, this is a solid like A tier, S tier thing to do. So remember, if you're on a team, you could definitely go that route. All right. So next up we have Poison Creeper. Poison Creeper. So Poison Creeper is the last thing I really want to cover in this because these are utility vines. You know, these are more utility. Poison Creeper is, on paper, it does a lot of damage. It does a lot of damage. However, the problem with Poison Creeper is that it doesn't apply the damage very easily. I've tested it out even with like really good items like Death's Web and things like that and trying to get that poison pierce and damage really high. The other thing about it is it almost seems like it's not applying the poison pierce. I know traps and other minions now are applying pierce. I don't know if this ability does that. I noticed that against really high poison resistance monsters, it was doing almost no damage, even though the on-sheet damage was 70,000. So it's... I know they're trying to make it more viable this season, but it doesn't seem like it's in a great place still. It needs more help, and hopefully maybe in future patch notes just before the season launches.
I can already tell that I'll be your best friend in this forsaken camp.
Or afterwards it gets a buff. I mean, that being said, though, it does a ton of damage, like mid-game through late game, unless the monsters have a lot of resistance. So it doesn't seem like the Pierce is applying on it. And it also seems like it's really hard sometimes to get the Creeper to actually apply the damage to the monsters. So sometimes you have to keep recasting it to get it to do what you want to do. I would rate this a C tier build for now. But that being said, we can watch it out. I mean, you can definitely use it. It's definitely usable. It just feels so much weaker and so much slower than so many other builds. Remember, when I rank a build, you know, it's meant to be like a whole range. You know, it's meant to take into account like where it is relative to like every other build in the game, and so it's definitely down there. It's definitely not as useless as some builds, but it's not quite where you want it yet, for sure. Werewolf. Okay, so shapeshifting. Maybe we should talk about the really strong skill first. So Rabies is really strong. Rabies is in a good place now. Like, Rabies feels really good, especially if you use a not even super rare item known as Plague Bearer that gives you 6 to Rabies, I believe, up to 6 to Rabies. It's really strong. Rabies, I tested it in areas that don't have a lot of physical immunes, and even without physical immunes, you can use a higher physical damage weapon. It's powerful. It melts high density very well. I'd recommend running it in very high density maps because everything will get infected and it drops. They drop fast. It does a ton of damage. It does like 80, 90,000, even 100,000 damage with those really high tier builds. And even before that, it still does a ton of damage. So I actually like this build. I'd say it's a solid A tier build. Solid A tier. It's not like it kills things as fast as its S tier builds, but it's powerful. It's super powerful. It's in a good place. I recommend this might be a good season to try out Rabies if you've never tested it before. Feral Rage is mostly a support skill that is used to maintain run walk and lifesteal, and you use it to stack it up, kind of like Frenzy. It's a Frenzy kind of stack thing, and it's very powerful. And yeah, it's a good skill to get at least 1 point into or more if synergies are required, which in most cases they are. Like with both of these, Rabies and Fury. Fury, which is another approach to the Wolf, I would say this is a solid C to B tier approach. And it's mostly because the Barbarian with Wolf Howl just straight up outstrips the Druid. The Bard has better, passive skills. It has battle cries, so it can pierce physical res. And you can use all of those abilities when you're in wolf form on a barbarian. But the druid kind of lacks some of that. And even though it has, higher damage, some other abilities and whatnot, it almost feels more worth it to just slap on a wolf howl on a barbarian and just use the same ability. Wolf howl has fury on it now, so you can do the exact same thing on a barb. And you have more masteries and more support abilities on the barb that you can use in wolf form that do more damage. It's the same thing though. It's a very powerful ability. But I don't know if... I feel like the barb also has battle orders that you can even level up even higher level. You can just become so much tankier and you can do more damage on the barbarian. It's good stuff, don't get me wrong, but I feel like maybe it's... I don't know. I think it's a solid maybe B tier build, but you got to get some good items on it, because if you don't have good items on it, especially in hardcore, you don't have the DR, you don't have the block, if you're using two-handed, you don't have the DR just in general, because you don't have the items for it. It's gonna suffer. But in general, Fury is fun, Fury is fast, Fury is powerful once you get the items, and if you have a really powerful weapon, like a really crazy Rib Cracker or something, it's powerful. I just personally don't see a reason why you would ever use this over on a druid versus on a barbarian, with the way the skills are currently set up and the skill trees are currently set up. It just feels so much better to use it on a barbarian. So you could do it on a druid if you want. It feels like it's just kind of left in the dust by Wolf Howl. So. Let's see. Werebear, Fire Claws do absurd amounts of damage. In weak Fire Claw maps, this is going to be nice. One problem with the bear in general, though, is it has horrible block frames. And also, it kind of is vulnerable to damage, especially when it's trying to block. And it's a little clunky sometimes. I would say bear builds in general are like C to B tier. They've been helped out a lot. They keep trying to buff them too. I just don't know if they're really ready for like crazy use in terms of like the druid at least. You can definitely do like bear sorceress or something and go double dreams and light mastery.
I can already tell that I'll be your best friend in this forsaken camp.
And be way stronger on a sorceress, for instance, as a bear. Believe it or not, but of course those are expensive items. Double dreams are it's very like rich stuff. But still, it's decent. It's decent. I wouldn't say it's horrible. Playing a bear is definitely fun. Bears are awesome. So even if it's not the strongest build in the universe, you can definitely go these abilities. Shockwave actually might be the best ability in this tree besides Rabies, believe it or not. So if you want to go and turn into a bear, and you want to go Shockwave, that's a good idea. Shockwave is better than ever now. It's been buffed again, and it honestly feels like it might be lacking a tiny bit of damage still, maybe a bit of AoE, but Shockwave is solid. Like, Shockwave also has amazing CC as well for groups, so this is a good build. It does a lot of damage. I would say this is somewhere between B, maybe small A tier. It's close, but it's strong. It's strong. I actually like this. This is a cool thing that Shockwave is actually a nice ability. So I know it sounds weird to say Shockwave is actually an ability you can damage with and use, but yeah, you can. Go for it if you want to turn into a bear, this is probably your best bet right now. 100%. You get that AoE clear too as well. All right. Let's go into the last tree here for the druid. Fire, which is pretty much all these skills. It encompasses everything. I could talk about some of these individually, but I did test this quite a bit at different gear levels because they buffed fire a lot, so I kind of wanted to see how powerful it was. Fire is strong. Fire is A to S tier for sure. Matter of fact, I would say like early game, it's definitely S tier, and once you get that really good gear, like right now it's 4-piece strings maybe, but if you get Raven lore, it hits so hard. is so powerful. It has such good AoE. It melts maps. So make sure you can survive it. Volcano also has insane AoE. It's super powerful. Fire is probably one of the strongest builds, if not the strongest builds on the Druid at the moment. I would definitely rate it as high as possible. Like I said, I think if anything is an S tier tree or an S tier approach on a Druid at the moment, it's Fire. Of course, it suffers against fire enemies a bit, but there's also a lot of physical damage on Volcano, and of course, there's also just a lot of damage in general, and the area of effect is just beautiful. It's so powerful. I definitely recommend the Fire Tree. Going Fire Druid in Season 2 is looking to be a strong approach, and have at it. Have at it. At the mid and late game, that is a great, great tier. In the mid and late game, I would also say that Tornado. So Wind Druid last season, it felt even worse than on Vanilla because of mapping and density. Just Tornado, even though it had the better pathing and they got such amazing, awesome pathing on it, it just didn't do any damage. The area of effect was so bad. And even Twister that had good area of effect just didn't do any damage. But now it does. Chat, everyone else, everyone who might be watching this, the Wind Druid is back. The Wind Druid is stronger than ever now. It is a strong build. It wasn't ever a strong build in LOD. It was just safe, it was good, it was reliable, and it did enough damage to get the job done in LOD. But now it's powerful. This is a powerful build. It's strong, it feels good. I would say it's a solid A tier build. I don't know if I'd go as far to say it's an S tier build. It definitely requires maybe some gear to really start to pop off, but man, it does damage. Twister is great for mapping. It hits a huge area of effect. It does enough damage now. I tried it out. Tornado is really good for single targets. It just hits really hard. It really needed that 20% damage boost, which it now has. It got that 20% damage boost. This tree is good. This is a great tree. One thing I should mention is that I even tried out... I know. You know, most people would say, you know, come on, Dark Humility, this is a meme, okay? It doesn't work. Arctic Blast, are you kidding me? You know what? I actually think that's an A tier build. Believe it or not, if you go Nightwings, Infinity, you get that negative res. You get Frostwind, believe it or not. You can actually use the Frostwind. This is a strong build. Like, Hurricane hits almost 5,000 damage. And you're just killing stuff by teleporting into it. So you can teleport a lot with Gust. And then Arctic Blast hits really hard against single targets. It's crazy. Like, if you need something to hit hard, it melts them. They get melted. It's a fun build. Teleporting with Hurricane and just melting people with Arctic Blast, like, it's actually pretty solid. Like, I would say maybe it's more late game than mid game, though, to be fair. You definitely need certain items. Like, without certain items, it's probably a B tier approach at best, maybe C tier approach. But if you got the items for it, I'd say it's solid, man. It's solid. Go for it. Go for it. Arctic Blast is a thing now, believe it or not. You can do it. Remember, if you get Gust to level 30, you have a lowest cooldown on it, which is 0.5. It's not a 0 cooldown still, though, so it's still got to wait a bit to reposition, which is just fine for anything like Tornado. 0.5 is amazing. Like, you can just kill something, teleport, kill something, teleport, and it's perfectly fine with that cooldown. One thing to note, though, is that, Wind is way safer, by the way. It has more crowd control. It's more safe than Arctic Blast, I should mention. I would say if I had to rank these two builds, Arctic Blast is still not quite as good as Wind. But yeah, it's good stuff. Anyway, Gust getting that 0.5 cooldown. Let's say you use Enigma on top of it. You can even chain your teleports with that 0.5 cooldown in Enigma. And with the new change to Enigma, you can even almost always have a teleport up of some kind, whether it's Enigma or Gust. And you can circumvent the cooldown. So right after you use Gust, use Enigma. And then use Gust again, use Enigma. So you can teleport like on LOD, and you just have two different hotkeys for it. And you can literally just, you can move very fast, and you can do very effective damage. So it's a very solid build. And you can also do that with fire as well, of course. So really good stuff. Ellie skillers help out that teleport as well. So having that Gust for most druid builds is good, especially for summon, just having 1 point at least. But for this, you can get that 0.5 cooldown and got high mobility, high damage. This whole tree is looking like AS tier, to be honest, except for maybe Arctic Blast, which would only go up to A tier at highest. Really good stuff this season. Looking forward to playing some beautifully strong, powerful elemental builds myself. Let's get it. All right. So that's it for the druid, guys, unless I missed something. I don't think so. I think I tried out all those approaches on that character. All right, let's go over the paladin. We have 2 more characters to go over. Paladin is also one of my favorite characters. He's a lot of fun. Zeal is just a really fun skill, and he has a lot of fun skills. Even a new one, Joust, which is just so much. It's so good for repositioning. It's just awesome stuff. Let's try it out. Let's try it out. Okay, here we go. So let's go over the paladin. So where should we start in the paladin? I guess I'm going to start in combat skills because most of the skills that you're actually going to be using for damage are in this tree. So let's just start in here and make it simple. Sacrifice does a ton of damage, but if you're using it as a pure sacrifice, it just gets outclassed by Zeal in every way. It just has more AoE. It hits more times, faster. Maybe sacrifice needs some kind of cleave effect. Maybe you need something to hit more enemies, but it's not great. I would say it's like CB tier, but you can definitely go pure sacrifice if you really want to. It's not horrible. Zeal. In the mid and late game, Zeal is solid. With all these aura options, guys, you have so many more auras. You even have magic damage on Sanctuary, which is being reworked and has gotten buffs and whatnot. And magic damage means you don't have to worry about physical immunes at all. So, or even other types of immunes, to be honest, for the most part. So if you use Sanctuary Aura and you use Zeal, even like early mid game, you're going to be able to kill everything. I've actually tested this a lot in Season 1 as well. Like, you do a lot of damage even without good gear. Like, you can use something as weird as a Rift. You can just use like a random weapon and it's still going to do a lot of damage. Zeal, in general, even with the auras, if you combine it with the auras, is definitely an A tier approach, even for leveling and for getting to that mid game. One thing to note about Zeal here, though, is that once you get a ton of damage on it, it's crazy. Like, you can kill Declone, you can kill Ubers, you destroy, you do tons of damage. It's really fun. For mapping in general, it might not be as effective as some other skills, but overall, I'd say Zeal is an A tier approach to the Paladin, 100%. Very strong, used in combination with other auras, not just the elemental damage auras, but also with, of course, Fanaticism for a pure physical damage build. Zeal is always amazing. Vengeance is still D tier. Vengeance needs a rework. It has not gotten a rework. And with some other changes, it actually got slightly worse than last season. So now it's just garbage. Unless you want to meme and mess around with something that's kind of different and cool, Vengeance is not in a great place yet. It needs help. So this build's a line on the ground dead, not breathing. So be careful with that one. Joust. Joust is not a build, at least not in my opinion. I mean, it doesn't have any synergies, right? So it can only do so much. But as a repositioning, along with charge, you have so much mobility. You can get right in there with Zeal. You can get right in there with charge. You can get right in there with hammers. It's just amazing. Joust is great. It should be taken at least 1 point to most builds. Not all builds, but most builds. So I definitely recommend getting at least 1 point to that almost all the time. It's an A tier skill, but it's not a build, so just keep that in mind. At least it doesn't appear to be. Holy Bolt. Holy Bolt is... Last season, I would have said it was S tier. The vanilla content would get absolutely obliterated by this stuff. You could heal your mercenary infinitely. And you can also heal your party, and you can also map effectively with a nice spread and a nice ability to shotgun Holy Bolt. It does a ton of magic damage. It's really good. This season it got a bit of a nerf, so you can't do quite as much damage. However, that being said, mid and late game, it is still a strong build. It is still a strong build. I know some people, when they see a nerf, they're like, well, I'm not playing that anymore. But in this case, it's still strong. It was still super strong last season. It was overpowered for sure. And this season, I would say it's in a good place. It's a really good skill. It's a good skill. It's still in a good place. You can still heal your mercenary to ridiculous levels, especially if you want to focus on the healing. The prayer synergy is crazy. It's great. You can heal and damage at the same time. There is a thought that it might get like nerfed into the ground and made it to where the damage component wasn't important anymore by making it not shotgun. But I'm kind of glad they didn't change that, because shotgunning is a cool mechanic for this ability and actually makes it possible to build around. And it also still makes it decently balanced for support. It doesn't do as much damage, though, as like some other abilities. So it's still an A tier build, I would say. It's not crazy. In groups, it might even be an S tier build, though, simply because of the healing potential as well, though. By yourself, it's A tier. It's great for farming and starting out, and it's safe. But in groups, it's S tier still. It's still so strong in groups. This ability is awesome. Definitely a good thing to try out still. You can definitely do it again. Do it again, chat. Do it again. All right, here we go. So, Blessed Hammer. So last season, I tried out Blessed Hammer. It felt garbage. It felt pathetic. It was, it almost felt like you're throwing around paper. It was pretty bad. It got nerfed into the ground. It didn't feel good. But it got rebuffed, and it's been revived. It's been revived, and I tried it out. You can get with really good items, not even the best items, you can get 10k damage. With really good items, you can maybe even still get up to 12k damage. In vanilla, you could get 15k pretty without too much effort. So it's still nerfed compared to vanilla, but with the mapping now and the damage you can get on it now again, it's actually powerful. It's strong. It's very strong. Hammers are back, chat. Hammers are back, everyone else. Blessed Hammer exists in PD2 in Season 2. This is a real build. It does more damage than Holy Bolt, actually. Once you get the items, and once you really get going, it does more damage because the hammers even spin faster as well. So against targets, you're hitting rapidly, multiple times. It's doing a ton of damage. It hits hard, and it's also not broken. It's definitely a little bit of risk reward. Unlike Holy Bolt, you kind of have to get in there with Joust, or with Enigma, of course. You can also use Joust and Enigma at the same time to reposition more times than every 3 seconds. I actually recommend putting Enigma on this, on Blessed Hammer, just like normal, like on LOD, once you can get the runes for it, because 3 seconds is a long time, and repositioning is so important on hammers, because the more times you can reposition and the more rotations you can get, the more AoE you can get, and the more monsters get shredded. But yeah, it shreds maps, it shreds everything, it shreds vanilla content. Blessed Hammer is back. It's definitely not S tier. It's not the craziest build in the universe, but it's definitely A tier. It's not broken. It's just strong. It's a very solid build. Fist of the Heavens. So Fist of the Heavens got a lot of buffs this season, but I have some bad news for people wanting to play Fist of the Heavens. It was even featured as one of the rebalance skills. They might fix this balance wise in the final patch. They could do it, and it would make sense if they did it. I don't know if it's going to happen for sure though. But one thing to mention is that from my trying of Fist of the Heavens so far is that it's garbage. It really is. It doesn't feel like Fist of the Heavens. It doesn't feel like Zeus is launching a bolt. It feels like you shocked yourself by putting a fork into the outlet. It's not up to par really. It's not killing targets. Like there's a lot of targets you think it should eviscerate with perfect gear, but I use really good gear. We're talking like griffins, all faceted, all Griswolds. I use some expensive stuff, and I wasn't killing some targets in one shot that you think should absolutely die in one shot. I tried Resist Lightning, I tried Full Conviction, I actually tried multiple approaches to this build, and it just didn't work. It just didn't do enough damage. The Holy Bolts don't do enough damage. The Holy Bolts that emanate they do damage to every target now, which is good. That was the main change they made to it, is that they damage everything now. The problem, though, is they just don't do enough damage. The damage is pretty pathetic. The wind-up is too slow. The lightning damage, even on the single target, is not enough, especially for the kind of gear that it takes to even get to that level. So it just didn't feel very good. I feel like maybe it would still be an insane ability this season without any changes, even for PvP. I mean, Fist of the Heavens has always been an amazing PvP ability. It does so much damage to a single target. It only takes a nice cursor hover, and it works. You can destroy someone with it. Does a lot of damage, but in PvM, it's still not up to snuff. It's bad. I would actually rate this build a C at most. I don't know if it's totally useless, but if you want to go for it, it's definitely going to be a weak build. And it's going to take a lot of gear to get it even to a point where you might think, yeah, that's okay. But it's not great yet. It's definitely not great yet. I'd recommend maybe they make it to where like the initial like charge of Fist of the Heavens maybe has a very small AoE effect right around it, maybe just to hit more than one monster. But I'd also recommend maybe just all the damage numbers are increased as well. It definitely needs more quality of life, I feel like. Maybe not like 70,000 bolts like in Path of Diablo, if you guys also play that mod, because that makes it ridiculous. But at least, some more love than it currently has. Holy Nova is a good thing to use sometimes in combination with Holy Bolt to get an insanely large AoE effect. But besides that, I mean, it's kind of like a Holy Bolt optimization. It's not really its own build. So same thing with Holy Light for healing. Very good abilities to use in combination with Holy Bolt. You can be an all-purpose healer, damage dealer, and just overall cool person that doesn't do quite as much damage as last season, but be in a good place. Be in a good place. Smite is not something you farm with at all. Not even close. This is not ready to farm with. I don't think it should be a farming ability, maybe though. So, I gotta kind of judge this one as an uber killing ability. It's still a pretty decent uber killing ability. It's like a B A tier single target killer. So, use it as it's intended. Don't try to think, oh, I got some splash with it, so now it's good. No, it's not the case. So, don't do that. Charge is solid. I tested multiple approaches with this. I could start talking about the Oridans here, but I think I'm going to save that for going over the resist auras and whatnot. But what I can say is the physical charger is also insanely strong. Two-handed, one-handed, it hits hard. It hits harder than anything. Charge is better for mapping, I would say, overall for killing monsters than Zeal, which also applies to Oridans with dragons and dream rune words and things like that. Just simply because you're not only getting your mobility, but you're damaging at the same time. So you're able to kill more monsters per second with this ability than this ability. So note that when you're trying to prioritize how you build a mapper. But yeah, charge is definitely the thing to focus on. And when you get that damage up, it feels really good. I think he's actually spec'd into charge right now. So I have a pretty ridiculous weapon just to see how much damage it did at the very high end. But yeah, it's crazy. It's very strong. If you get really strong weapons, it's going to hit really hard. It's going to hit like a truck, and it's going to be fun. I'd say that's definitely an A tier build. It's definitely not the fastest, most insane build ever. It's also not the safest thing because sometimes it gets locked if you hover over clickables like chests or like dead bodies. Things that can drop items. Clickables like chests, like the ones in Lower Crossed. There's a chance that it can lock up, and then you have to weapon swap to unlock it. the weapon swap can cost you your life sometimes because you don't have as good of a shield or as good a res on your swap, so be careful. Be careful. This is kind of just a utility skill. You can almost have this on a hotkey as a one-pointer, but I don't know how useful it is with more than 1 point. It's kind of cool if you just want to get some extra crowd control, though. Maybe in the case of using it for parties to stay a bit safer, it's probably a good idea. Holy Shield. Holy Shield has always been like the defensive ability. On the Paladin, this is the skill. If you want a high tier defensive ability, this is the one to go for. Period. This is why using a two-hand might be fun on a Paladin, like a bow, a pike or whatever, for charging or even for zealing, like a two-handed sword. However, you're going to be really squishy. Without this, the Paladin is way squishier, way more vulnerable to dying than the Sorceress. The Sorceress has Holy Shield at least, right? I mean, not Holy Shield. The Sorceress has Energy Shield. When you don't have this, you don't have nothing on a Paladin. You don't have nothing. And when you don't have a shield, you also don't have res usually too. So it's hard to get your res up because you're lacking that res on the shield, the base res. Most cases, you're going to want to max this out once you get a decent shield, like this one. And, just max it out, and you get Hawes, Alma Negra. You can use whatever you're trying to do. And you can get a good shield. You can use Hawes. You can even use Spirit. Even Spirit is a decent shield. Just make sure your base is decent. You get a decent amount of block chance on the shield, and then you start pumping points in a Holy Shield, and it's going to feel good. It's going to feel like, wow, my defense, my block, everything's feeling good now. Everything. I'm not dying anymore. In some ways, this ability's always been a bit overpowered, but it's also just super powerful, and it's what the Paladin needs to be as tanky as other classes, at least as tanky. If not less so, because a lot of other classes have a lot more abilities that help out with their tankiness. So that's very important stuff. All right. Now, most of these abilities, you can tech into them as passives to help your AR, or in the case of concentration, it's used for hammers. By the way, concentration, for everyone out there that's confused about how it works, it only boosts the magic damage of hammers. All other magic abilities are not boosted by concentration. That includes Bone Spear, any of them. Only hammers. Besides that, it boosts the damage of all other physical abilities, not magic abilities. So don't think it's going to boost them. Hammers are special. They've always been special. It was a bug originally in LOD, and they kept it. And even this mod kept it because, it's fun. It actually was fun for blessed hammers to do a lot of damage. They weren't intended to, but concentration gives it the boost it needs. So remember, concentration is the other skill for hammers, even though it's not immediately obvious. Fanaticism is usually your go-to for a physical Zealer, so it's super solid. For a non-physical Zealer, if you don't have those expensive aura items, any and all of these auras, Holy Fire, Holy Freeze, Holy Shock, Sanctuary, are all your best friend. If you don't have a really powerful weapon, I'd highly recommend using one of these abilities. And if you're trying to play safe, Holy Freeze, right? Holy Freeze is very safe because you slow down the enemies around you as well. And get the synergies for them as well, and then get Zeal. So when you're trying to do Zeal or something like that, or charge, if your weapon is garbage, don't go for Fanaticism. You want to use this as a powerful weapon. It doesn't scale very well with weak weapons, whereas these give you a ton of nice elemental damage on top of them. So make sure to use those accordingly. All of these abilities are solid, though. They all have their own purpose, whether as a synergy, as a passive, or just an extra party aura, so it's all good stuff. I really like what they've done to all the trees in general on the Paladin. Yeah, it looks good. Thorns is a niche thing. This is not a tier of a build at all. This is kind of like a... It's actually, believe it or not, if you get a lot of attacker takes damage, this can be a very effective approach. It's actually underrated. It's very powerful. But I wouldn't do it on hardcore unless you're very tanky as well, because you got to get hit. So It's you almost have to just make it vulnerable, but you can do this. This is a build. This is a build. I'd say it's at least B to A tier, and it's definitely fun. So play with it. Conviction, really good in parties. Usually not necessary to max outside of parties, though. You're almost never going to want this outside of the parties because of the resist auras, 1, and 2, because in Project Diablo 2, you can only reduce a monster's resistance to 0, not negative 100 like in Lord of Destruction, which means that there's only so much benefit you can get from ultra high conviction. So in parties it can be nice though because you boost everyone's potential to do tons of damage against all the monsters, you know, with their fire and cold and lightning spells. But besides that, I don't know if, like, you know, usually you're not going to want to be messing around with this too much in Project Diablo 2 with solo play. I tried it with Fist of the Heavens too, and it's, yeah, I think resist lightning is still better even for that, especially once you get your facets and your infinity. And if you get things like that, it's just not that. It's not good. All right, so defensive auras. Now, you might think normally, you know, I would just go over this and be like, okay, this is all useful stuff. But believe it or not, resist auras are they're very integral to damage builds in Project Diablo 2. So Salvation is incredibly useful in parties, boosting that damage, just like with Conviction. If someone already has Conviction or you already have an Infinity, I'd almost just recommend going to Salvation every time, because Salvation boosts the damage, which is how you get more damage out when the monster is already at 0 res. Salvation is crazy. It was crazier last season, though. All of this stuff got nerfed. All of it got nerfed heavily, because last season it was nuts. Like, you would make everyone's damage go through the roof. I don't know if anyone knows this, but, you know, or if many people know this. Some people know this, of course, but it was actually possible to get a character to 200,000 damage if they had Salvation, Resist Fire, and Train Set all at the same time. And they were using, using Dragon and Hand of Justice. So, believe it or not, it was actually possible to do that. And,
I can already tell that I'll be your best friend in this forsaken camp.
It was a joke. It was a joke. So they definitely nerfed all these auras, and they also nerfed the Train Set, of course. I personally think that, you know, the Train Set's actually pretty toxic because it crowds out a lot of builds. But, you know, at least it all got nerfed, and it's looking like it's in a better, more fair place, at least, to where you wouldn't only go those in all situations. But yeah, they give damage. So, you know, resist fire gives damage to fire, all this other stuff. One thing to note is that if you're going a Dream Paladin went from, I feel like, an A tier to a B tier build. It's still very strong, but it's a very expensive build. It requires dreams, and they nerfed the Holy Shock aura on it. And it feels a lot worse because of that. It definitely has so much less damage on it. And with Resist Lightning nerf as well, on top of the Dream nerf, Lightning wasn't insanely powerful last season anyway, except for, like, maybe the Enchantress. But, like, I don't know. With all those nerfs to the Dream Paladin, it's definitely feeling so much weaker that with all those runes you have to invest into it, I would say it's gone down to, like, a B tier build maybe from, like, an A tier build. And as for Dragon Den, it's gone from an SSSSS build to an AS build. So it's still an S build, I would say. Dragon Den still does consistent damage. Since its minimum isn't low and its aura is insanely powerful, if you get both dragons and Hand of Justice on the Paladin, the AoE is still insane. The damage is still insane. Dreams still don't. They never had the crazy AoE, so, like, they never had that to begin with. And now they lost a lot of their on-hit damage with charge. But Dragon Den with the dragons and resist fire still feels really good. It's not as crazy as last season where you could get up to 200,000 with all the auras. It's also not crazy enough to destroy players 8 anymore, but it still destroys higher player count even than players 1. It's expensive, but it's still worth it. I would say it's still like an AS tier build for sure. Still make a Dragon Den if you want. You know, if you're rich enough, go for it. Get those runes. charge into stuff and destroy it with fire. There was another build that I used last season that kind of was you could like max both of these and this, and you could actually like use Dreams, Dragon, and Hand of Justice, and then you could kill fire and lightning immunes, depending on which aura you switch to. But because of such heavy nerfs, that build doesn't feel so good anymore. It's dropped down from like a A tier build to like a C tier build. But you could still do that if you want. It's not horrible. But it's definitely with all the nerfs to these, hybrid Oradin is what I called it, is no longer really much of a thing. Not as much anymore. The utility and of course healing auras, always solid in a group. Defiance, mostly a good synergy for Holy Shield if you need some defense bonus and don't have anywhere else to put your points. But overall, good synergies. 1 point of Vigor is always nice for moving around the town at the very least, if not also improving the speed of your charge. So Vigor is solid, but you never really need to put more than 1 point into it usually, unless you're going Hammered in, or in this case you're going Charge. But, just depends. Redemption... Redemption is one of the reasons why some of those builds on the Paladin maybe still feel a little bit maybe not as powerful as they could be. Even though Blessed Hammer is back up to snuff in terms of damage, not having that life off of the Redemption is definitely still feels pretty bad. Last season I suggested maybe it's boosted to 10 life points recover, not 5. But I guess they still felt it was overpowered. As a matter of fact, I think it was nerfed to 5 points at one point. But mostly, if you're going to use this at all, use it if you don't have Insight already, and just use it as a mana recovery tool for when you get hit by mana burn and then you can't use your abilities, or you just, don't want to chug as many potions when you're charging around everywhere, because charge can get expensive on the mana, even though has a high cost for one charge. If you're charging everywhere all the time, you're definitely going to drain that out unless you have mana leech on your build somewhere. So there's options for mana, of course, but if you want mana, it can be useful to put 1 point into, but for the time being, I don't know, it definitely lacks on that health recovery, and the Paladin lacks on health recovery in general, unless you have some form of life per kill or life leech. So it's definitely one of those things that definitely got nerfed hard from LOD. All right. Well, that's pretty much it, guys. That's pretty much all really to go over in this section with the Paladin. I definitely think the strongest builds for the Paladin are still Dragondin, Hammers, Holy Bolt, and Zeal and Charge if you get powerful enough weapons in the end game. And Fist of the Heavens is still in a bad place, at least at the moment of me recording this, and just before Thursday when the final notes are released. But based on all the testing I've done on beta, that's how it is. So that is how it is. Just remember that I tested all these builds over the course of beta. As things were being changed, I've also retested them. So this is all up to date for now, but it could change. All right, so Assassin, the last character in Diablo 2, right, chat? Did I get all the characters except for Assassin? I think so. Let's go over the Assassin for Season 2 PD2. So, Assassin, I think I need to go over the trap skill. The trap tree first. So all I can really say about Assassin is that Assassin has the only skill in the game that is currently what I would rate as not just S tier, but SS tier. And it also has so many other S tier abilities, but strangely enough, or maybe not strangely enough, they're all in the trap tree. Every single one. They've gotten so much benefit from Train Set, but not just Train Set. We're talking all kinds of things. They've been buffed this season in a lot of ways, and they've had to have been brought down to earth many times because they allowed for piercing on traps, which is amazing. It's cool that you can pierce on traps. It really is. That you can get facets and they actually work now. Griffins actually works for lightning traps. That's cool stuff. But man, it's made the traps insane. Like, this is the most broken tree in the game to date. I know I saved the best for last almost, but that's pretty much what it is. You got to get to the end of the video, I guess, to find out what the most broken build is. But it's traps. Traps are nuts. I don't even know what to go over first, but I can go over Fire Blast. Fire Blast is balanced. I'd say it's an A tier approach. If you put all your points into Fire Blast, it's actually strong and it's fun. You can use it as a side ability with lightning abilities as well to synergize or to complement your lightning damage so that you're not vulnerable to lightning immunes. Same thing with Shockweb. With fire immunes, same thing. Shockweb is super solid. I love how they added a lot more synergies to it, so now it does a lot of damage. It melts things if you get enough synergies on it. It's powerful. I like these two skills. I would say they're A tier. They're not broken, though. As for Blade Fury, I'll probably discuss that first before we get to the really powerful stuff. Blade Fury, is still, that uber declone killing build. So it's still very effective at that one target shredding. Despite getting some nerfs and some changes, it's still very, very powerful. Definitely one of those go-to builds for killing that Diablo clone. You should definitely consider it, for sure. Next up, though, that I want to go over. So I would say that's that's pretty much what it's used for. It's not really used for mapping. So just to make that clear, it's not really something used for leveling. I actually did try to level it up as Blade Sins. It can be a little tough in some scenarios. It feels really good once you get to Mephisto though, and you just cut him down in 3 seconds. But even with janky gemmed flails and things like that, so it's actually kind of cool. But despite that, it's not really like a farming build. All right, so I could just hover over this skill here for a while. Let's talk about this skill. So this is Dark Humility's, maybe most people's, honest rating. I have tested this ability in so many different scenarios, so many different skill levels, so many different item combinations because I just wanted to get at just how powerful this thing is and maybe how broken it is. It was broken in Season 1. It was the strongest skill in Season 1. I have news for you. As of this time of recording, this is still the strongest skill in Season 2, even with some nerfs. It's been nerfed for sure. It's definitely taken some damage, but remember, it also got all those other buffs as well, and it also got buffs in Season 1. This ability has such an enormous AoE. It spreads, it shoots extremely fast. Even if you see the on skill on the screen, if it says it only does 2,000 damage, don't be fooled. 2,000 damage can map, even with just 2,000 Wake of Fire, you can actually map with it. In Ruins of Ijun, with 30 skills, no joke. You could use Nightmare only gear, and I tested this today, even I showed it off to the stream. Nightmare gear, literally Eye of Etlik, Tarnhelm, no skills on the rings, maybe 2 to 3 skills on the claws, 1 skill on the armor, and the Torhan jungle. The maps get destroyed. You don't need any items you need in hell. You can just farm Nightmare, go straight to hell, and start farming maps with this thing. It's crazy. They've even added a fire immune into one of the maps, and it doesn't do much, but some of the other maps still don't have any, so it's it tears them to pieces. If you don't get the fire immunes in there, it's crazy. It's so crazy. You don't need Pierce, even though the Pierce got buffed. Even though it's a thing, you don't even really need it. At levels that are mid-tier, late tier gear, I tested that as well. You don't even need the Pierce. Pierce is optional. Just go at Meph, Magic Find, and just shred with this thing. It just obliterates the whole map. There's no other ability, by the way, that at any skill level that is as strong as this ability. So even at level 30, there's no other ability that can map quite like this can. I mean, some can struggle map, but this thing can destroy. Like it's just
I can already tell that I'll be your best friend in this
it's
forsaken
as long as you don't just as long as you're not messing around with the fire means too much, but you still can mess with them a little bit if you synergize with Shockwave, for instance. You can, or Death Sentry, of course, which I'll talk about in a second. But overall, this is an SS tier ability. I would say it's the only SS tier ability currently. It's super strong for starting, super strong for mid game, and once you get that Pierce and once you get that Infinity, even with the recent nerf to Pierce, I tested it again, it still destroys everything. It's so powerful. At every point in the game, every gear point, it doesn't fail. It's so easy to get geared up with this thing, especially if you got your resin defensiveness on hardcore, but on softcore, you just could start mapping. Go straight to the maps. That's all you gotta do. You don't even have to farm LOD content to get to the point to where this skill is powerful. It's just that crazy. All right, I think we've said enough about that now, but I just want to get that out there. It's if you want something really overtuned, just go for Wake of Fire, 100%. Wake of Inferno. Wake of Inferno. Wake of Inferno. Is actually really strong now. I would say it's definitely A tier, and against single targets, it's S tier. It's so powerful. Like it does up to like 20,000 damage now, like per tick, and you can even use it on Diablo clone. Believe it or not, you can just stack these on them and kind of just run around and just hide in a corner and just wait till the Wake of Infernos kill them. And well, unless you have to dodge an attack, but honestly, it's super strong. It got a buff and it shows. It might even be a little bit overpowered. Just like I said, like I think it's borderline S tier in a lot of cases, but it's definitely nowhere near this overpowered. But it's still because of how this ability works, but and the spread it has and everything and the AOE. Like if you do the stutter step with Wake of Fire, you can just go. Burst of speed, you just walk, and the whole map just melts. And your loot filter will identify if an item drops, and it's just crazy. But anyway, this thing's good though. It's good. But yeah, if you play this ability properly, you could do anything with it. The Wake of Fire and Wake of Inferno definitely has some solid uses. Don't underestimate that one either. Charge Bull Sentry, it's looking strong, especially for single targets. It hits them very solidly. It's definitely a possible build. You could actually focus this and run it. I don't know if it's as effective as some things for mapping necessarily because it doesn't fire super fast and it can be a little inconsistent, at least in the ultra late game, but it's solid. It's definitely an A tier approach at the very least. Lightning Sentry is definitely an A tier skill. I would say it's definitely weaker than going Chain Lightning Sentry, which are actually different builds. But against single targets, it does better, so it depends on what you're focusing. It's still super powerful at all points in the game. Even without gear, it's still super powerful, so make sure to check that one out as well. Chain Lightning Sentry is definitely S tier. This is a really strong build. Now they buffed it up a lot. And in certain maps where there's not many lightning immunes or lightning resistance to begin with, you can destroy, for instance, the Ancestral Trial, for instance, map. And it just gets shredded. You use this in combination with Death Sentry, kind of like how you might use Wake of Fire, and everything just gets blown up, and you can just kind of run around. And I think it's actually a little too strong, maybe. It got overbuffed, I think, but it's super strong. If you want to go traps, that's definitely a good choice, especially if you don't want to go fire, which is what a lot of people will be doing. So if you want to go something that might have cheaper items somewhat, but still insanely powerful, go for that one. And Death Sentry. Oh, by the way, I should also mention, I tried these two traps at multiple price points for gear as well, and multiple gear points. They're all strong in all points as well, so you really can't go wrong with traps. You really can't. You can almost do whatever you want in the trap tree, and it's going to be either at least strong, powerful, and solid, or broken. So It's really that easy with the traps. Death Sentry. What can I say about Death Sentry except that they've nerfed it so many times in this beta, and it's still so powerful. Like, if you have 30 skills and that's all you have, you just have some janky ass gear for Wake of Fire. One way to make your maps really pop off, even without like any gear at all, almost, is just to use Death Sentry. Like Death Sentry plus Wake of Fire is so strong, even without gear. With gear, you don't even need Death Sentry because Wake of Fire just melts everything in one shot, so you don't even have to worry about that. Even with the nerfs, of course. They've also tried to nerf this thing a lot, but it's still not enough. It's just that powerful. But with Death Sentry, it pops off at every point in the game. You should almost always have this in your back pocket as like a synergy. Maybe you get a synergy for it, maybe not both synergies. But even without all of its synergies, it hits so hard. It blows things up. Like, once you get some bodies, the bodies hit the floor. That's all I gotta say. Once you get some other bodies, the rest of them hit the floor. It's just so powerful. And really, what it comes down to is that 5 to 10% corpse life. They've nerfed the damage a lot, like the damage of the fire damage elements, but that's not where most of the damage is coming from on this thing. Like it's just the base stat on the top, and it just does so much crap. It's so much damage. And you use this in combination with lightning sentries or with Wake of Fire, and you will be blowing up maps at every stage of the game, even when you maybe shouldn't be mapping, like when you only have 30 skills. So one thing I should mention though is Chain Lightning Sentry is definitely superior. Like I said, this is S tier. This is like A tier.
I can already tell that I'll be your best friend in this forsaken camp.
You will have no problems, and with Burst of Spirit, you'll be going speedy. You'll be Sanic destroying the maps. So all you really need is that power. Like, if you want the power, if you're a power guy or a power person, or you just want to farm and get rich on the ladder quick, this is a good scheme. Start in the cow levels and go into the maps with very little problems. Yeah, powerful stuff. Trap tree, definitely the strongest tree in the game at the moment. I would say overall, just really crazy. I guess I could start. So for Shadow Disciplines, I can start with Mind Blast. Mind Blast is a build that was very popular in Season 1 for a reason. It had a huge AoE and it did a ton of magic damage. It was honestly even stronger than Hammerdins were. It was like the Hammerdin, I guess, of Season 1. Because the Hammerdin was so garbage in Season 1, there was no Hammerdin. There was a Mind Blast Sin. Mind Blast Sins with FCR just blow up like huge swaths of enemies. Just have to keep casting it a few times and everything just dies. It's just very powerful. They nerfed the radius. They didn't touch the damage. They actually restored the damage on it. And honestly, I feel like it's in a pretty good place now. It maybe took a little small hit to its damage, and it took a hit to its AoE, but it still feels really good in maps when the density is high. You can still hit it very hard with this ability. It's very safe because you can use it at the edge of your screen and you can kill monsters. It's maybe one of the safest skills in the game because of how far away you can launch it from. It's very safe. It's very powerful, especially once you get a lot of plus skills. I wouldn't recommend using this over traps though ever in the early game, and maybe not at any point in the game currently. But one thing you can do with Mind Blast is you can do so many more maps with Mind Blast because it's magic damage. So you don't have to worry about the immunities really scuffing up your build. But that being said, though, in traps, Death Sentry does fire and physical damage. And if you use that in combination with lightning damage, immunities aren't going to touch you either there. So it's, well, not really. So it's a strong build, though. It's in a good place. I feel like it's an A tier build. Mind Blast is A tier. Last season I would have said S tier. Very similar situation to Holy Bolt. So Holy Bolt went down from S to A tier. Both very solid builds. Holy Bolt's still like honestly like S tier for like vanilla content. So is Mind Blast, S tier for vanilla content. It's just mapping is a little bit weaker because they took out some of its AoE effect. So Psychic Hammer is of course also solid for those single targets. It's also slightly stronger. It's part of the same build. and you can use it very effectively. If you're ever going physical damage sin of any kind, that includes martial arts, you just take this. So you want to max it out usually. That includes blade sins as well, as long as you have a dagger or a claw. So, well, you should have a dagger if you're doing like declone or something. You should use like flesh ripper. But yeah, anyway, it's good stuff. It's good stuff. Max that one out. Weapon block can be solid. Just remember, it's never going to be as good as 75% block on a shield. And remember, you're not going to get damage reduction on those gear pieces either if you're using claws. So it's never going to be as good as the shield approach on hardcore, personally, in my opinion. But if you want to get some decent survivability, I tested lots of dual claw setups. It seems fun. And weapon block, you can level it up a bit more than one skill if you just want to get it up to like 60%, 61% maybe. Burst of speed. You do actually need to put more than 1 point into it now if you want to actually hit that trapling breakpoint. So keep that in mind. The trapling breakpoint, I believe, is 51, I think, if I remember right. So it's 51. So remember that if you have attack speed on your gear plus this, just make sure it's over 51 or 51 or over, and you're good. Also, you run really fast, so yeah, this is one of the reasons the assassin can be very efficient, as well as the speed. The run speed is just really, really good. It's really good for stutter stepping and trapping as you're moving along the map and just shredding all the monsters. Fade is maxing that sucker out can be very good on many physical builds, especially in hardcore, but especially against like Diablo clone, because just so much damage and you need really high resistances. And of course, you also need like DR, so it gives a lot of damage reduction as well. Fade is a really good skill. Venom. So all I can really say about Venom as a skill is that it could be used for Whirlwind, but you can also just not even bother with Venom for Whirlwind and could go more of a physical damage approach. I personally think it could use a small buff. I would say it's maybe like a B tier skill overall. However, it can buff up all of your physical attacks, even if you're not using poison damage. So I would personally want the buff maybe to be a bit higher though, because I've noticed some builds that really rely on it, like Whirlwind, maybe are still lacking a tiny bit of damage. Like Whirlwind Sin is a thing. I tried it out. Maybe the Fury Rune Word could also use to be indestructible as well, so it could be ethereal. But the Whirlwind Sin maybe needs some help in the form of maybe increased venom damage or some kind of other ethereal claw, but it's almost there. Like Whirlwind Sin, I feel like is like a B tier build this season, so it's getting there. It's getting there, and it's solid, it's powerful, you could use it, and it's fun, and it's maybe even better for PvP. But of course it is. But it's it's getting there. It's getting there. I feel like it's a good spot to talk about the Venom or the Whirlwind Sin though, because that's kind of one of those things that uses it, and of course there's all the martial arts abilities that use it as well. So, but it's either where it's supposed to be, and maybe some other builds need buffs in other ways, or it's either maybe needs a small buff. I don't know. It's hard to tell. Shadows, you don't really want to max out the shadows. Sometimes you can put more points to make the shadow tanky enough to survive in maps for longer periods of time. Mostly only the Shadow Master is going to be able to survive, though, because it has that resist all. And it's also the only one that would ever survive against Declone if you max it, and maybe pre-buff it even. Very solid stuff, though, in general. Oh, yeah, you know what? Killua is right. I actually made an oopsie there. It's actually physical damage on Mind Blast. Which means actually you can benefit quite a bit from getting, which is true, Reaper's Toll on the Mercenary. I do remember using the Reaper's Toll on my Mercenary. I actually forgot. This is not magic damage. It's actually physical now, so yeah, just a correction there. Just a correction on this one. This is physical damage, so you can actually boost it with Amplify. So, for instance, like Reaper's Toll, something that amps the monsters will actually cause you to do a lot more damage with Mind Blast, which is really good. It's like a nice area of effect Zeal almost, but you can stand like 10 yards away, so that's why it's still a nice A tier build. But I forgot, yeah, that's the other one. Hood of Shadows, I don't know if you'd ever max this except for Declone, but it helps against Declone because he has a lot of defense, so that's kind of nice. Let's see here. All these abilities, all these traps. Yeah, sorry. False information, fake news. That one's not magic damage. Sometimes I'll say something that's wrong, so it happens. No, you can't pre-buff for Declone, but you can have the Shadow Master, though. The Shadow Master can be a thing, I think. Unless they might have even made it to where the Shadow Master can't spawn, but last season it was the case that it could go in there, so I don't know. There's definitely some new mechanics that are still changing all the time. So Declone is currently very much in flux. So there's a lot of things that could happen with Declone. You gotta be careful about that right now. All right. Anyway, martial arts. We saved the best for last, maybe. I mean, maybe not the strongest for the very last.
I can already tell that I'll be your best friend in this forsaken.
We actually did a lot of testing in the martial arts tree, though. A lot of testing because, this got a huge rework this season. It works very differently now. All the chargers.
I can already tell that I'll be your best friend in this forsaken.
You can actually expel the charges now, up to 3 charges, just by using only the skill. You don't actually need a finisher anymore, and the skills are very powerful. So, the skills are very, very powerful. So I actually like a lot of these abilities. However, I'm gonna kind of go through them one by one. But the first one I'm going to go over is, honestly, feels pretty bad. I actually think this is like a C/D tier ability, unfortunately. I tried it out. It doesn't have, once again, it kind of suffers from that same problem a lot of physical abilities still suffer from, is that there is splash, but it's not enough. It doesn't have enough of an effect. If you want to use this effectively, you got to use a claw or a dagger anyway. And I tried it with like Ghost Flame. I tried it with some other cool things as well. And ultimately, thematically, it's also pretty boring. Like, at every charge, it just increases its damage. And it just feels boring. It feels clunky compared to, like, most physical abilities. And it just really doesn't do that much. I would rate it a pretty bad tier. This is a very bad ability right now. It could definitely be way better. I think they could do something cool with it. Maybe make some physical AoE or something. Or, like, make the monsters knock back into one another and deal damage to each other as they knock back into each other or into a wall or something. But overall, it's I don't know. This ability just doesn't really fit in with the rest of it, and it just doesn't. It's not very cool. It can be cool to make a build for this and mess around with it. It can be somewhat fun. I've tried it with lots of different combinations and with some finishers as well, which we'll talk about in a second. But it's just not. It doesn't feel very good yet. It's just. It doesn't even feel like it does enough damage, but even with the 3rd charge, so it might need some more help. But it's viable. It's viable. Like, I wouldn't say it's so trashy. That's why I'd say maybe it's C tier, because like you could do it. I actually made it possible to do it, but it's just like, I don't know. It's so clunky. It's so clunky. Dragon Talon, well, as you might know from LOD, same deal. I mean, kicks in is a kicks in. Kicks in, you can use Rift. Kicks in, you can kill Ubers with it. Kicks in is a build still. Kicks in is solid. Rifts in is solid. Kicks in is solid. But, compared to most builds, I would say this is only like a B, A tier build. In most cases, and that goes for Ubers as well. It's just maybe not quite as, doesn't pack as much of a punch as maybe some of those other single target builds. But it's cool. And it's powerful. Maybe I should go over Dragon Tail and Dragon Claw. So Dragon Tail is a fire damage based ability. I tried it with Ghost Flame, which theoretically should be one of the best weapons for this build because it's a dagger. It does a ton of damage. It does a ton of physical damage. It does a ton of fire damage because it has 25% fire damage now, according to the new patch notes. And it's still you could use it in combination with just like setting like a fire charge or like using fire in combination with it, but it feels kind of like it's not necessary. Like it feels way better to just go through all these charges or all these charges than ever to use this. Like this doesn't ever feel like it's necessary. It doesn't feel like it pops It doesn't have enough of AoE. It also doesn't have enough, like, I don't know, cool factor maybe. It just doesn't do anything that you would ever want it to compared to some of these other builds. I don't recommend going finishers.
No!
1-1.
Coach Keith, 11 months. Guys, spam those eyes of Xana in the chat for Coach Keith. Let's get it. Spam him in there. Let's get it for him. But yeah, I'm not a big fan of using finishers for damage in general. I mean, this is cool. Kicksin is still a build, but ultimately it's not the strongest one. These two just feel clunky and out of place because you don't need them, right? You can expend the charges without using them, one. And in two, they don't have enough AoE, it doesn't feel powerful enough, it just doesn't feel like it does anything that is fundamentally important to like deal your damage, to get your damage delivered to the monsters. And I just don't feel like they're in a good place right now. They used to be required to, expend your charges, which made them, at least something that you had to do. But now you don't even have to. Like, I almost don't even recommend playing with these at all. Like, now it's almost like these are just like, I would say they're honestly D tier. Like, I wouldn't touch these at all right now. Like, D tier, you don't even bother. It's not the coolness of the tree at the moment. Their rework did so many cool things for martial arts, which we're about to get to, but it's not in the finishers. Unless they change the finishers, not very good. Dragonflight is still good for utility, but ultimately, I also wouldn't mess around with this either. It's between the shadow passives and the rest of the charge up abilities, you got all the damage you need. And this doesn't, it also feels a little slow and clunky when you're using it for damage, but if you're using it just to teleport into the monsters, this is solid. I actually recommend on most martial builds you put 1 point into Dragonflight because you can get right up in there and just you can just stab the crap out of them, and, or slash the crap out of them. Just get right up in there. It's good stuff. It's good reposition ability, just like Joust. It's very similar to Joust. I think the cooldown is identical actually. So. It's cool. It's good stuff. It's really good stuff to get Dragonflight, but you don't want to max it out or anything. Playing with the finishers is a serious damage dealer. It's just not very good this season. Not yet. At least as the time of recording, once again. All right. Tiger Strike, not great. That's okay. Yeah, so let's go over... Let's go over Fists of Fire. So, no, they don't, actually. We're about to get to that in a second. Fists of Fire is actually pretty solid. Fist of Fire is a good ability. Fist of Fire is solid, It is solid. So, actually, I want to see something real quick. Where is this? Okay, yeah, Fist of Fire is solid. So, Fist of Fire... really good stuff for early game. They actually had to nerf it in early game because it was like killing Andy in like 4 shots basically. Like it was pretty nutty. But apparently it's I would say for late game though, this is not one of your best abilities. Late game, there's so many other fire abilities out there in all kinds of trees and all the classes that are so much better than this. It doesn't have a crazy good AoE effect. The radius that it increases to at charge 2 isn't very impressive in the mid-late game. And ultimately, there's way better charge up skills to use primarily. The way I like to use these charges, because weaving them can be difficult, especially if you don't specialize for it in your gear. Usually you just kind of want to use that ability and go with it. I mean, you could weave it if you want with Phoenix Strike because it's a synergy for Phoenix Strike. But... ultimately, I think in a lot of cases, if you weave it, you could weave it with Phoenix Strike if you want to circumvent immunities, but it's still pretty underwhelming to use it as a charge ability compared to the other ones. I would say as a build, it's like a B tier build. It's not crazy underpowered, but I feel like it needs a bit more AoE or something. It's kind of like Leap Attack and a lot of other abilities that I rate as a B tier build, because of a lack of AoE or a lack of like some kind of like oomph to it that really makes it stand out. It also doesn't even stand out damage-wise, so I feel like it's not maybe the best approach for martial arts this season, but it's usable. You could do it. I definitely did it. It was effective. It just was slow, and it didn't really kill that many things. Cobra Strike. Cobra Strike, I would say, Cobra Strike is B-A tier, I would say. So I would actually say this is almost there or it's there. It's a strong build. Fart Sin, as it's been called, is actually a build. You can run really good items with it. You can run Plagues. I recommend running Plague once you get your runes, once you really get your higher tier builds, because you can get that negative poison res and that lower res proc. Heck, if you even run a Plague on the Mercenary, you could get 3 Plagues procking lower res, and you can get a very, very reliable negative res and lower resistance, and you can kill a lot of stuff with this. The AoE is good on this ability. Unlike Fists of Fire, it's got good AoE on all of the attacks. The only reason I would say it might not be an A tier build is because it feels like it's lacking a little bit of damage compared to similar poison builds, especially considering the risk because you have to get right up in close combat. I would say it should be at least doing almost as much damage as Poison Nova. So I'm kind of feeling like maybe it needs a bit more damage. Like I feel like the damage might be a small limitation, but the damage is almost there. Like it's still doing almost 20k, not quite as much as Poison Nova, but it's still doing a lot. I feel like with the Life Leech too, it definitely has an advantage. It might even be safer than the Poison Necro because he doesn't have as much sources of replenishing life. But I think it could use a bit more damage personally. That being said, solid ability. You can definitely go, especially once you get your items. It starts to feel really good in maps, especially maps that don't have much poison resistance, like River of Blood. Just make sure to find a way to survive. If you use 2 Plagues, it might be hard to survive in there. You might only want to use 1 in Storm Shield. So, along with Bramble as well. So Bramble is solid. Nice build. Nice build. You could also get Venom on top of it. Another limitation, though, to Fart Sin or Cobra Strike, though, is that some of these other martial arts builds, what you can do is you can apply Venom to all of your attacks on top of the fire synergies, so you can make like a full damage build. But since Cobra already has Venom as a synergy, it's kind of like lacking like other places to get damage, mostly at this point. Like, I'm noticing there's also a bit of a lack of a synergy, maybe. Like, maybe you might even want, like, another synergy somewhere because, like, it's basically a 40-point build, whereas some of these can be 80-point builds if you're also getting Venom on top of it. And it seems like all you really can do with the rest of your points is kind of mess around with them with maybe Shadow Master. One good thing about Cobra Strike, I guess, is you could get a really tanky Shadow Master, and you could be very safe on the front line, which is good. And other good things as well, such as maxing out Fade, maybe, if you already have like enough attack speed on your claws. So, yeah, I mean, I would say maybe Farsa might even be the tankiest approach. It might be the safest one, and it might also do a decent amount of damage. That might not be as high as some of these other ones that I'm about to go over, but it's very solid. It does the damage, and it's safe, maybe, because you can put so many points into Shadow Disciplines. So that's kind of cool. Overall, it's a B or A tier build. I tried it out at the end game and with some other gear as well, and so it's pretty good. It's pretty good. Claws of Thunder. I'm going to say right now that I actually think with Claws of Thunder, this is the strongest ability in the martial arts tree. I would say it's a solid A tier build. It's the first solid A tier build I've actually gone over in this tree. And it's solid. Once you get the damage for this, once you get like Griffins and whatnot, you are hitting extremely hard. You could shred, absolutely obliterate maps with this thing. Like you just keep. It's got a lot of good AoE. It's got like Nova. It's got Charge Bolt. It's got Lightnings. It's got nice AoE. It does a lot of damage, more damage than any of the other abilities by a little bit in some cases. And you could also get Venom on top of it, so that also hits those lightning immunities or lightning resistant monsters. So you could stack Venom, and then you could get this as well, and then you can make that an 80-point build with the Phoenix Strike as the synergy, and the Venom and the Cobra Strike as the other synergy, and you can actually hit really hard with this. I like the AoE, I like the damage. it's very solid. Blades of Ice. Blades of Ice is another A tier build. Just like this one, it doesn't have quite the AoE or the damage of Claws of Thunder, even with the optimal items. However, it has such crazy good crowd control that it's probably, I mean, I said this was safe because you could get the Shadow Disciplines. I would say maybe this is even safer. If you're on hardcore, Blades of Ice is a strong consideration because it does a ton of damage. It has some decent AoE, better AoE at least than Fist of Fire. You might notice the radius on the damage is 4 yards versus 2.6 on Fire, which actually means it actually has decent radius. And it does kind of the same thing as Fire, but with better radius, and it has all the crowd control you could ever want. It freezes them constantly, just constantly freezing the monsters right in front of you. And it's really solid ability. It feels really good to use. I'd say it's another good A tier martial arts sin approach. And last but not least, in our covering of everything I've learned from testing the beta so far before the final patch notes, we have the Phoenix Strike. So remember, all this stuff could change once again after the final notes are released. There could be different power rankings slightly based on any future changes. I've definitely made recommendations.
I can already tell that I'll be your best friend in this forsaken camp.
I've tried to make my knowledge public. I've posted feedback. I've also made it available, of course, to the team as well in case they want more feedback. They've definitely taken so many feedback. I can already
tell that I'll be your best friend in this forsaken camp.
They've taken feedback from all kinds of content creators and all kinds of testers in their beta. So. I'm just one of the sources of feedback for sure, but I've definitely given them all my assessments of these skills, so this is not secret information.
I can already tell that I'll be your best friend in this forsaken camp.
So maybe this stuff will change very soon, actually, very soon. But yeah, Phoenix Strike, guys. Phoenix Strike is really, really good, actually. I love this skill. So let's go over the last skill. This is another A tier skill. This skill doesn't maybe quite do as much on-sheet damage ever as these two, but it does enough damage to destroy the monsters in the map still. And I would say this ability is way better for solo play, at least, than group play. Maybe Blades of Ice is better for group play, but Phoenix Strike is really solid. You don't have to worry about immunities because you do all sources of damage. You can literally just sit there and use up all 3 charges of your ability, and no matter what the immunity is, they're going to get hit by a Meteor, or lightning, or basically the orb, and they'll die. They'll die, 100%. Everything will die to this thing. It might not be as fast though as some of the other builds, but it's super reliable. You could destroy everything with it. It shreds. It destroys. I love playing with this ability. You could use full Natalias even, and still kill a tier 3.
I can already tell that I'll be your best friend in this.
So don't be afraid of not having enough gear for this build, because I used full Natalias. Full Natalias was just fine. It was still clearing maps just fine. It's powerful. It uses all the attacks. You could just use it. Remember, you don't have to worry about finishers. You could just use it in succession and just kill everything. It's very strong. Just keep charging it up. By the way, that goes for all these abilities. You could just use... You can specialize. You can specialize in Thunder and then get Lightning Pierce on your gear, and you could get like lightning % damage on your gear. You could get Ghost Flame and use Fist of Fire, for instance, for the % fire damage, or you could use Fire Lizard's Talons. But I don't think that's one of the better builds. Same thing with Blades of Ice. You could use like Nightwings. So all these abilities are really, really solid like that, but Phoenix Strike is good. Like, if you want to go Phoenix Strike Sin, go for it. That is definitely a good build. It does a ton of damage, it does enough damage, and it hits everything, it kills everything. So you don't have to worry about what map you're in. You can just do whatever you want with this one. This one's solid. I tested it out, and it feels good. I would also say about Phoenix Strike is it has the highest amount of AoE, or area of effect, out of all of these abilities. All of them. It has a ton of area of effect, so it's definitely good for mapping for sure. Phoenix Strike is good, 100%. Solid A tier ability. So that is my review so far, pending future patches just before the launch of the ladder reset for Season 2, and before the release of any future patch notes. So if that will help inspire anyone or give maybe an idea of, might be able to give people an idea of what to play for Season 2, that's going to be awesome stuff, or what to at least work towards as they try to gain currency. I hope I was able to help people out with that quite a bit. And if you guys see any nerfs or buffs in the patch notes to any of these abilities, just know that might actually affect their ranking by me, at least at this time, and it can definitely make them either better. Yeah, hopefully, most builds are just going to get even better and better in a better place. Maybe not as many S tier builds, maybe more A tier builds that are balanced, that are strong. Nothing that destroys the game at any point that feels a little too broken.
I can already tell that I'll be your best friend in this forsaken camp.
One of the reasons I think so many people in the PD2 community love Project Diablo 2 is because it holds true to the philosophy of D2 in general, or Diablo 2, which is to have a nice, satisfying progression where you're not just entering a room and blowing up the room instantly and then moving and then instantly blowing up the room, where a lot of modern ARPGs definitely focus their gameplay on. So PD2 as a mod for Diablo 2 holds too true to that. It's not a face roll mod, and hopefully, all the mods get even more of the abilities become more viable. There's more viable builds than ever in Season 2 Project Diablo 2. Based on my reviewing in this beta, this is getting just more and more insane. It's going to be more and more hype than ever. Last season, there's definitely a lot of non-usable builds, but because of a lot of these changes, there's so many more builds that are usable, so many more builds that are strong, and there's less builds that are so overwhelmingly powerful. So it's just getting better and better, and we can just hope for better and better changes from Senpai Something and Co. And we can only hope for the best in the future. So I hope you guys enjoyed, of course, all of my awesome stuff, all of my testing throughout the week. Everyone in my stream, I hope everyone enjoyed all of that crazy amount of testing that I did with different items and different levels of items on all kinds of builds. And make sure to like and subscribe if you're on YouTube, and follow Dark Humility at Dark Humility, twitch.tv/Dark Humility. And I will see you guys later. Peace out, guys. Let's go get it. Season 2 Transcendence Project Diablo 2. Over and out, Dark Humility.